That bike is finished, son. You're wasting your life on a ghost. Every man who's touched that machine walked away. Every single one. There's a reason nobody talks about who it belonged to, and if you're smart, you'll walk away too. Some things are meant to stay buried, and some secrets, they'll bury you right along with them. Those words were spoken by the oldest mechanic in Millbrook, Montana, a man who'd seen 50 years of engines and never once flinched at anything. But when Logan Carter pulled that rusted Harley into the light of his father's garage, the old man had gone pale as Ash turned around without another word and never came back. If you've ever believed in something that everyone else said was worthless, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storage warehouse at the edge of Millbrook had been locked for 11 years. Logan Carter knew that because his father had been the one to lock it. He'd found the key tucked into the back of a desk drawer 3 weeks after the funeral, taped to a folded piece of notebook paper with nothing written on it. Just a key, just silence, just one more mystery his father had left behind without explanation, the way Raymond Carter had always done things, quietly, privately, with a kind of deliberate secrecy that Logan had never fully understood and never thought to question until it was too late to ask. He was 22 years old and he was broke. Not the kind of broke where you skip a dinner out or put off a vacation. The real kind. The kind where you sit at a kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at a stack of bills that adds up to more money than you've ever held in your hands at one time, and you realize that the thing your father spent his whole life building is about 3 months away from disappearing entirely. The Garage Raymond's Repair. A name so simple it almost hurt to look at it on the weathered sign above the door was hemorrhaging money. The equipment was old, canon. The client list had shrunk to almost nothing. 2 of the 3 mechanics who'd worked for Raymond had already left after the funeral, not out of cruelty, but out of practicality. They had families. They had bills of their own. Logan didn't blame them. He just couldn't follow them. He'd grown up inside that garage. He'd learned to read by sounding out the labels on oil cans. He'd learned patience by watching his father disassemble an engine piece by piece with the same careful attention a surgeon gave to something alive. Raymond Carter had never been a man of many words, but he had communicated everything he needed to communicate through his hands, through the way he held a wrench, the way he listened to an engine before he touched it, the way he could diagnose a mechanical problem by sound alone, the way he treated every machine that came through his door like it deserved to be understood before it was fixed. Logan had inherited that quality. He hadn't inherited the business sense to go with it. 3 weeks after the funeral, staring at that unmarked key, he made himself a promise. He was going to find whatever his father had locked away. He was going to open the warehouse. And he was going to figure out if there was anything inside worth saving, because right now that felt like a metaphor for everything. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight when Logan finally drove his truck out to the warehouse on the edge of the property, a squat cement block building that sat behind a rusted chain link fence at the back of a gravel lot his father had rented for decades from an old rancher named Hector Pruitt. Hector had called Logan the week after the funeral to say that the rent was paid through the end of the year, and after that they'd need to have a conversation. And Logan had thanked him and hung up and quietly added that date to the mental calendar of emergencies he was already managing. The lock on the warehouse door was so stiff from disuse that Logan had to brace his foot against the frame to get enough leverage to turn the key. When it finally gave, the door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human, and the smell hit him immediately: dust and oil and old rubber and something underneath all of that. Something metallic and cold that he couldn't quite name. He stepped inside and clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a shape in the center of the floor. Logan stood completely still. He'd expected boxes, equipment, maybe some old parts his father had set aside. He hadn't expected this. It was a motorcycle, or what had once been a motorcycle. What it was now was closer to wreckage, a machine so thoroughly consumed by time and neglect that it took Logan a full 10 seconds of staring before his brain assembled the pieces into something recognizable. The chrome was buried under rust so deep it had gone from orange to almost black in places. The leather of the seat had cracked and split and curled away from the frame like peeling bark. Both tires were flat and crumbling, the rubber having rotted from the inside out. The handlebars were twisted slightly to the left, as though the bike had been dropped hard on that side at some point and never straightened. Cobwebs draped across the engine in thick silver curtains. Logan walked slowly around it, keeping his distance, at first the way you might give a wild animal space. The flashlight beam moved across the details one at a time. The gas tank, the exhaust pipes, both of them, the chrome so eaten away that the metal beneath had pitted and warped. The front fork still somehow intact, though the front wheel was almost completely seized. The frame itself, and here Logan slowed down. Here he leaned in closer. The frame was a different story. He'd been around motorcycles his whole life. His father had worked on everything from Japanese sport bikes to vintage Indian motorcycles. And Logan had absorbed enough of that education to recognize quality when he saw it, even buried under 11 years of accumulated ruin. The frame of this Harley Davidson was something special. Even in the darkness, even under everything that had been done to it, by time the lines of it were unmistakable. This wasn't a production frame. This was custom work. Somebody had built this machine by hand or had paid someone extraordinary to build it. The geometry of the frame told a story about craftsmanship that Logan could read the way other people read words on a page. "What are you?" he said quietly to nobody. He crouched down beside the engine. The Harley Davidson emblem was still there on the tank, or at least the ghost of it was. He could trace the shape beneath the rust with his fingernail. Evolution engine, he thought. Late 80s, maybe early 90s. He looked at the rear fender, then the front, then back at the engine cases. There were modifications here that he hadn't seen before, even in his father's shop, which had seen some remarkable machines come and go. Somebody had known exactly what they were doing when they built this bike. And then somebody had locked it in a warehouse and walked away. Logan sat down on this concrete floor next to the motorcycle and stayed there for a long time. He didn't tell anyone about it right away. That wasn't like him exactly. Logan wasn't a secretive person by nature, didn't have the same instinct for privacy his father had possessed. But something about the Harley felt like it belonged to him alone, at least for now, at least until he understood it better. So he drove back to the garage and he went through the rest of the week in his normal routine, what little routine was left, and he didn't say anything to Denny Marsh, the one remaining mechanic who came in 4 days a week and kept the lights on with his labor. And he didn't say anything to his neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, who had been bringing him casseroles twice a week since the funeral, and asking him gently whether he'd thought about maybe selling the property, and he didn't say anything to anyone. He just thought about the motorcycle. 6 days after he'd found it on a Tuesday morning with the rain still coming down, he drove back out to the warehouse with a tarp, a work light, a camera, and a notepad. He was going to do what his father had always done before he touched anything. He was going to look at it first, understand what he was dealing with, document the condition, figure out what was there and what wasn't and what could be saved. He spent 4 hours on the floor of that warehouse alone with the work light and the motorcycle and the sound of rain on the roof, and he filled 6 pages of notes and he took over 100 photographs. And by the time he drove home in the gathering dark, he had already decided something that he knew most people were going to tell him was insane. He was going to restore it. Denny Marsh had been a mechanic for 31 years. He was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with a gray beard he had been growing since before Logan was born, and he had a manner that could be described as blunt without veering into unkind. He'd worked for Raymond Carter for 18 of those 31 years, and he'd respected the man enormously. And he'd extended that respect to Logan, not as a favor, but because he genuinely believed in the kid's ability. But that didn't mean he was going to pretend something was a good idea when he didn't believe it was. "Show me what you're talking about," Denny said, and Logan drove him out to the warehouse. Denny stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked in and circled the motorcycle once without touching it, his hands in his jacket pockets, his expression carefully neutral. "That's a Harley Davidson," he said. "Yeah. That's been sitting here a long time. 11 years minimum, maybe longer." Denny crouched down and looked at the engine from the side. He was quiet for a while. Then he stood back up and looked at Logan with an expression that was almost apologetic. "Logan, I know what you're going to say. Do you, because I'm going to say that this machine is beyond restoration. The frame might be salvageable. Might. The engine is a question mark I don't feel good about. Everything else, the chrome, the rubber, the electrical, the leather, that's all gone. You're looking at a complete tear down and rebuild, and you'd be doing it with parts that don't exist anymore, which means custom fabrication, which means money you don't have. And time. You don't have time either. You've got 3 months before this shop goes under, and you want to spend that time on a project that's never going to pay you back. I didn't say it was a business decision. Everything's a business decision right now. The frame is original custom work, Logan said. Whoever built this bike, Denny, they were serious. This isn't somebody's weekend project. This was somebody's life. That's real nice. It doesn't change the math. I'm not asking for your help. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Denny looked at him for a long moment. Your dad, Ed, he said finally, used to say that the most dangerous words in a garage are, I know what I'm doing. He also used to say that the only machines worth saving are the ones everyone else gave up on. Denny didn't have an answer for that. He pulled his hands out of his pockets and gave the motorcycle one last look. I hope you know what you're getting into, he said, and walked back out into the rain. Logan stayed. He'd already known what he was getting into. He just hadn't known yet what was waiting for him inside the machine itself. He started on a Wednesday. He cleared a full bay in the back of the garage, moved everything out of the way, and had the motorcycle transported from the warehouse on a flatbed because the tires wouldn't hold air. He set it up under the brightest work light he had, and he spent the entire first day doing nothing but cleaning. Not restoring, not disassembling, just cleaning, removing the surface grime and dust and cobwebs layer by careful layer until he could see what he actually had beneath the neglect. By the end of the first day, he'd confirmed 2 things. The frame was even better than he'd hoped, and whoever had owned this motorcycle had loved it with the kind of devotion that leaves evidence. Custom welds, modified brackets, hand-machined engine covers with a pattern on them he'd never seen before. A simple design, just an angular wolf's head, small enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking, repeated on 3 different components in 3 different locations. A signature, he thought, the writer's mark, the equivalent of an artist signing a canvas. He photographed everything. He started a separate notebook just for the Harley and wrote down every detail he found, every modification, every marking, every anomaly. His father had kept notebooks like this, methodical records of every machine he'd worked on, written in the small, precise handwriting that Logan had always associated with Raymond's particular kind of intelligence. Logan's handwriting was messier, faster, more impatient, but the impulse was the same. He wanted to understand this machine before he changed it. He wanted to know its history. He would come to understand later that this instinct to document everything was the thing that saved him and possibly several other people as well. The town of Millbrook had approximately 4,000 residents, and it operated the way small towns always do, which is to say that information traveled faster than any formal communication network could manage and arrived pre-interpreted before it reached most recipients. Within a week of Logan beginning work on the Harley, people were talking about it. Most of the talk was not charitable. Kid's lost his mind. Was already losing the shop anyway. Now he's definitely done. You know whose bike that was? Nobody around here will touch anything connected to that situation. This last comment reached Logan's second hand through Denny, who had overheard it at the hardware store, and delivered it with the diplomatic care of someone dropping a live wire into a conversation. Whose bike? Logan asked. That's what I'm telling you, Denny said. Nobody will say the name directly, but they all seem to know something about where it came from, and whatever that something is, it makes them real uncomfortable. How uncomfortable? Tom Briggs. You know Tom. He was working on bikes before either of us were born. Tom took one look at the picture you put up on the garage Facebook page and called me to say I should talk you out of it. I asked him why. He said, just tell him some things are better left alone. And then he hung up. Logan set down his wrench. What did my dad know about this bike? Denny looked at him steadily. That's the question, isn't it? Walt Greer was 81 years old and had operated a gas station in Millbrook for 50 years before retiring, and he was the closest thing to a living historical archive the town possessed. He sat on his porch every afternoon from 2 to 5, regardless of weather, drinking iced tea and watching the street, and he was known to answer direct questions with direct answers, which was why Logan drove out to see him on a Thursday afternoon with a photograph of the Harley printed from his phone. Walt looked at the photograph for a very long time without speaking. Where'd you find that? He said finally. Warehouse on my father's property. Raymond had it, apparently. Walt handed the photograph back. He picked up his iced tea and took a slow drink. I haven't seen that bike in 26 years. Figured it was gone. What happened to it? Who owned it? Boy named Eddie Reyes. Though calling him a boy isn't quite right, Eddie would have been about 40 when I last saw him. He was a rider. One of the Hells Angels boys came through here back in the 90s. He wasn't from here originally, but he came through town a lot and people knew him. He was a particular kind of man, quiet, respectful, the sort you wouldn't have guessed what he did for a living if you didn't already know. Always paid for his gas, always said thank you. Never gave anyone trouble. Walt paused, and one day he came through and said he needed to store something, and then he was gone. And that was the last anyone saw of Eddie Reyes. He just disappeared. People disappear, Walt said. Sometimes they choose to, sometimes they don't get to choose. The porch was quiet except for a truck passing on the highway below. Did my father know him? Logan asked. Walt looked at him with an expression that contained something Logan couldn't immediately read: caution maybe, or a carefully held sadness. Your father knew a lot of people, he said. Raymond Carter was a man who kept things, didn't throw much away. Not objects, not people, not obligations. He paused again, long enough that Logan thought the conversation might be over. Then Walt said very quietly, your father was a good man who made one promise that cost him something. I don't know the full story. I only know what I could see from the outside. What did you see? A man who took something in and kept it safe for longer than maybe he expected to, and never talked about it, and never stopped worrying about it. And then one day he locked it away and didn't talk about it anymore. Walt put his iced tea down and looked at Logan directly. You're going to keep working on that bike? Yes. Then be careful, Walt said. Not because of anything I know for certain. Just because some things that were buried on purpose, and digging them up has consequences. He picked up his iced tea again. Your dad would tell you the same thing if he could. And then he'd tell you to use your own judgment. That's the kind of man he was. Amayo. Logan drove home slowly that afternoon and sat in the garage for a long time after he parked. Not moving, just thinking. The Harley sat in its bay under the work light, stripped down now to the frame and engine, every removable piece cataloged and organized on the shelves he'd set up along the back wall. It looked more like an archaeological dig than a restoration project. He'd been looking at it that way all along. He realized treating it less like a machine to be fixed and more like a thing to be understood. He pulled out his notebook and wrote down everything Walt had told him. The name Eddie Reyes, the Hells Angels, the year somewhere in the mid-90s, which matched the rough date he'd estimated for the bike. The word disappeared. The phrase his father had made one promise that cost him something. He read the notes back to himself twice. Then he went back to work. The discovery happened on a Friday evening 3 weeks into the restoration. Logan was cleaning the area around the fuel tank. He'd removed it from the frame and was examining the mounting points, checking for stress cracks, when he noticed something that stopped him cold. The underside of the tank wasn't right. It looked right at first glance, but Logan had his hands on it, and his hands were telling him something different from what his eyes were seeing. The metal was slightly too thick in one section, a section that ran along the bottom of the tank about 8 inches long, covered by a false panel that had been finished so carefully it was nearly invisible unless you knew what you were looking for and were holding the tank with both hands in a specific orientation. He set the tank on his workbench and pulled his inspection mirror and his light. It took him 20 minutes to find the seam, a hidden compartment welded into the belly of the fuel tank during manufacture or modification, sealed with a fastener system that had been designed to be invisible and that he only managed to open because he had the tank upside down under a magnifying work light, and because he had his father's instinct for noticing the things that didn't quite belong. The compartment was sealed, waterproof. He could feel that there was something inside it. His hands were steady. That surprised him a little. He'd half expected them to shake. But they were steady as he found the right tool and worked the fastener carefully loose and steady as the panel finally gave way and the compartment opened. Inside, wrapped in oilskin cloth so old it had stiffened to a near leather consistency, were 3 things. A folded photograph, or what had been a photograph, a group of men on motorcycles, 8 or 10 of them. Arms around each other, grinning at the camera. The image was faded nearly to illegibility, but he could make out the figures, could see the bikes, could see enough of the clothing to recognize the cut and patches of the Hells Angels. On the back, in a handwriting that was slanted and quick, someone had written Brothers. Chicago Run, 1991. A journal, Small hardcover, its pages swollen and warped from moisture, but still largely readable. The handwriting inside was the same as on the back of the photograph. The first page said property of ER. If found, do not destroy. Read first, then decide. And a folded piece of paper, separate from the journal, newer looking than the other items, sealed inside its own smaller envelope of wax paper. On the outside of the envelope, in the same handwriting, to whoever finds this, I'm sorry it fell to you, but somebody has to know the truth. Logan sat down on a shop stool. He sat there for a very long time. The work light hummed above him. Outside, the gravel lot was empty. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't see. He picked up the journal. He read for 3 hours straight. The journal belonged to Eddie Reyes. He'd written it over approximately 4 years. The first entry dated February of 1992, and the last dated March of 1996. The handwriting changed over those 4 years. It started fast and assured, full of confidence, and it ended cramped and urgent. The letters pressed hard into the page as though the pen were a tool for something more than writing. Eddie Reyes had been a member of the Hells Angels for 17 years at the time he started the journal. He'd been a writer his whole adult life, had come up through the Chicago chapter, had traveled the country on the back of machines he'd worked on himself. He was, by his own description, a man who'd made peace with the life he'd chosen and didn't apologize for it. He was also, by his own description, a man who'd stumbled onto something he hadn't gone looking for and couldn't walk away from once he'd found it. The something was a land deal, or what looked like a land deal on the surface, a series of property transactions in 3 counties in Montana, involving parcels of agricultural land that had been in family hands for generations, and that were being acquired through a combination of legal pressure and what Eddie described as methods that were significantly less than legal by a company called Meridian Land Holdings. The families being pushed off their land were mostly older, mostly without legal resources, mostly isolated in ways that made them vulnerable to the kind of pressure that Meridian seemed comfortable applying. Eddie had found out about it because one of the families, a ranching family named Kowalski, which made Logan's hands go cold when he read the name, because Mrs. Kowalski had been bringing him casseroles since the funeral, and he'd never once thought to wonder why she'd been so close to his father. One of the Kowalski family had reached out to someone in the Hells Angels network, which was how the club sometimes operated, as an informal network of people who knew people, and the message had found its way to Eddie. He'd started investigating on his own. The journal documented everything: names, dates, transactions, the people he'd talked to, the documents he'd managed to obtain. He'd been building a case. He hadn't been going to the police because, as he wrote in one of the later entries with a dry humor that Logan found unexpectedly affecting, the local law is the last place you take something like this. I've been around long enough to know which way that particular river runs. He'd been going to his brothers, to Marcus. The journal was full of references to Marcus, a man clearly trusted, clearly important, clearly someone Eddie believed in the way you believe in the people who've earned it over decades. The last entry was short: March 14th, 1996. I don't know if I'm going to make it out of this. They know I've been asking questions. The bike is safe. I put everything that matters in the place only I know about. And I left word with Raymond Carter in Millbrook about where it is, because Raymond is the one man I trust who isn't connected to any of this. He can't get involved. I told him that, but at least he'll keep it safe. At least the evidence won't disappear with me. Somebody will find it someday. Somebody will do something with it. I have to believe that, or I can't write this last line. Marcus, if you're reading this, somehow you know I would have found another way if there had been another way. Tell the boys I went out thinking about them. I hope this was worth it. I think it was. E.R. Logan set the journal down. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and stayed there for a minute with his elbows on the workbench and the silence pressing in around him. His father had known. Raymond Carter had kept the motorcycle hidden in that warehouse for 26 years because a man he trusted had asked him to. A man who had disappeared, and Logan understood now with a cold clarity exactly what kind of disappearing Eddie Reyes had done. He'd been silenced. He'd been removed from the equation by the people whose equation he'd threatened to disrupt. And Raymond Carter, quiet and private and careful, had kept the promise he'd made for 26 years until it had outlasted him. Dad, Logan said quietly to the empty garage, "What do I do with this?" The garage didn't answer, but Logan already knew. He'd known since the moment he had opened the compartment. Probably before that, probably since the moment he'd decided not to walk away from the rusted wreck in the warehouse the way every reasonable person he'd talked to had told him to. He picked up the journal again and started from the beginning. By the time the sun came up, he'd read everything twice and started a separate document on his laptop where he was transcribing the key information from the journal dates, names, company names, transaction details. He was being systematic about it. His father's instinct again. Understand before you act. Document before you change anything. The photograph he'd propped up against the base of the work light, and it had sat there watching him all night, the blurred faces of men who'd ridden together in 1991, at least one of whom had been dead for 26 years. He kept glancing at it. He picked it up when he finished transcribing. 8 men. They were standing or sitting on their bikes, shot in what looked like a parking lot, the light hard and flat and midday bright. They were laughing, most of them. One man in the center was taller than the others, with his arm around the man to his left. And Logan studied this image for a long time because, even through the fading and the blur, he could see something about the man on the tall man's left. Something in the way he stood, the way his shoulders were set. That was different from the others. More alert, more watchful. A man who was always paying attention even when he was laughing. On the back, brothers, Chicago Run, 1991. Logan flipped it back over. He looked at the man in the center again. He thought, that's Marcus. He didn't know why he was so certain. He just was. So, the letter in the wax paper envelope was the last thing he read. It was dated several days before the final journal entry, and it was addressed to whoever finds this. But as Logan read it, he had the growing and then certain sense that Eddie Reyes had written it with a specific person in mind, someone he'd imagined into existence, the person who would one day care enough to open the bike up and look inside. The letter was 2 pages long. It gave more detail than the journal about what Meridian Land Holdings had done and how they'd done it. It named 3 specific individuals, 2 businessmen, and 1 local official who had been directly involved in what Eddie described as a coordinated campaign to dispossess farming families of land that an infrastructure project had made suddenly valuable. It described specific instances of intimidation. It listed the families affected, 12 families. The Kowalskis were third on the list. The last paragraph of the letter read, I don't know who you are, but you found this, which means somebody trusted you with the bike, or you trusted yourself enough to look for something everyone else said wasn't there. Either way, you're the right person. I spent 4 years doing this work, and I never found the right person to give it to. I ran out of time. You found it at the right moment, whatever that moment is, and whatever moment it is, I believe it means something. Don't let it stop with you. The families deserve the truth more than the men who hurt them deserve their silence. ER. Logan folded the letter carefully and put it back in its waxed paper envelope. He sat in his garage as the morning light came through the windows and turned the metal surfaces of the tools and the motorcycle components from gray to gold. He thought about his father, who had carried this weight for 26 years and never said a word. He thought about Eddie Reyes, who had died or been made to disappear for following his conscience into dangerous territory. He thought about Mrs. Kowalski and her casseroles and the way she sometimes looked at him when she asked how the shop was going, a look that he had always read as simple neighborly concern, but that he now understood contained something deeper. She'd known his father. She'd trusted his father. Maybe she'd even known why his father had kept himself slightly apart from everything, slightly behind a wall, as though he was protecting something. He thought about the motorcycle sitting in pieces on his workbenches, something extraordinary hidden beneath years of damage, waiting for the right person to look past the surface. He picked up his phone. He wasn't going to call the police. He understood that, and he understood it clearly the way you understand things at sunrise after a night of reading somebody's truth. The police were one of the structures Eddie Reyes had specifically said he didn't trust. Logan didn't have enough information yet to know whether that distrust was still warranted. 26 years was a long time. People changed. Institutions changed. But he knew this wasn't the moment to make that call. Not yet. Not before he knew more. He wasn't going to post anything online. Not yet. He was going to do what his father had done and what Eddie Reyes had done before him. He was going to be careful and methodical and patient, and he was going to build the fullest picture he could before he showed it to anyone. He opened his laptop and started a new document. At the top, he typed, "What I know about Eddie Reyes, June." He worked on the motorcycle every day for the next 6 weeks, and he worked on the document every night. The restoration was technically demanding in ways that challenged him consistently. Parts that didn't exist had to be sourced through networks he didn't know about yet, which meant hours on the phone with suppliers across the country, following chains of referral through the motorcycle restoration community, one person leading to another person who knew someone who had what he needed. He was learning things about this world he hadn't known before. The tight, specialized community of Harley-Davidson restoration, the collectors and craftspeople and historians who kept this knowledge alive. The more questions he asked about the bike's specific components, the more interesting the answers got. "That's a custom build," a man in Illinois named Garcia told him during one of these calls. "I mean, genuinely custom, not custom in the sense of aftermarket parts, but custom in the sense that somebody with serious fabrication skills and serious knowledge of Harley-Davidson engineering built specific components to their own specifications. You don't see this level of work outside the real community, and even inside the community it is rare." "By real community, you mean the clubs," Garcia said simply. "The serious clubs. I'm not going to name names over the phone because it's not my place. But a bike like this, the level of craft, the specific wolf's head marking, that's not random. That's a signature. Somebody out there knows that signature, and if they see what you're working on, they're going to have something to say about it." Logan thought about that for a long time after the call ended. He thought about Marcus. Denny Marsh came back. He showed up on a Wednesday morning about 4 weeks into the restoration, walked into the shop without announcement, the way he'd always done when he worked there, and stood at the entrance to the bay, where the Harley was laid out in its organized stages of disassembly and partial reassembly. He stood there for a while without saying anything. "I thought you washed your hands a bit," Logan said without looking up from the engine case he was cleaning. "I did. Then I couldn't sleep." Denny walked slowly around the work area, hands in his pockets, looking at the pieces on the shelves. He stopped in front of the engine. "You've been doing good work." "I know." The frame, cleaned, inspected, 2 stress cracks filled and repaired. Stronger than it was originally, I think. Engine, going to be a full rebuild. I've got everything I need for the bottom end. The top end, I'm still sourcing. Chrome, custom shop in Bozeman. Expensive, I'm handling it. Denny looked at him. "How are you handling it?" "I sold the old equipment in storage bay too, the stuff that was too outdated to be useful, and I took a loan." Logan set down his cleaning tool and straightened up. "Don't say anything about the loan." "I wasn't going to." Denny was quiet for a moment. "People are still talking." "Let them." "The talk is getting more specific. People are saying the bike belonged to a Hells Angels rider who disappeared. They're saying it's bad luck to touch it. They're saying," Denny paused, "they're saying your dad knew something about it and kept his mouth shut, and that maybe you should do the same." Logan looked at him steadily. "What do you think?" "I think your dad kept his mouth shut because someone asked him to, and your dad was a man who honored his commitments. I think that's different from the way some people are framing it." Denny picked up a wrench from the tool rack, turned it in his hand, set it back. "I think if you found something inside that machine that matters, you need to be real careful about what you do next. And I think you're probably going to do it anyway. So I'd rather be here helping you than sitting at home not sleeping." Logan looked at him for a moment. "You can take the Tuesday through Friday shifts," he said. "Same rate as before. We're going to need to start bringing in more regular work and to offset what I'm spending on this project." "Fine," Denny said. He reached for his coat hook, his old coat hook from when he'd worked here before, and hung up his jacket. "You want to tell me what you actually found inside that bike?" "Not yet," Logan said. "Oh, soon, but not yet." Denny nodded. He didn't push. That was the thing about Denny. He understood patience the way people who've worked with machines understand it. Some things can't be forced before they're ready. "All right," he said. "Show me what needs doing." The threatening started on a Thursday. It didn't begin with anything dramatic. It began with a car parked across the street from the garage for 3 days in a row, a dark-colored SUV, different vehicle each time, but always the same description, always with someone sitting in the driver's seat who wasn't doing anything except watching the building. Logan noticed it on the first day and told himself it was probably nothing. He noticed it on the second day and said nothing to Denny, but started paying attention. On the third day, he walked across the street and knocked on the driver's window. The driver was a man in his 40s, clean-cut jacket and tie, looking more like an accountant than anything threatening. He looked at Logan without much expression and rolled the window down 2 inches. "Can I help you?" Logan said. "I'm just parked," the man said. "You've been just parked here for 3 days. It's a public street." Logan looked at him for a moment. "If you have something to say, you should say it." The man met his eyes. There was nothing overtly threatening in his manner. Nothing dramatic. It was more the complete absence of anything. The blankness of someone who'd been trained not to react. "You've been working on an old motorcycle," the man said. "People in certain circles have taken notice. There's interest in acquiring it at a price that would significantly help a business in your situation. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. The question is the price." "It's not for sale," Logan repeated, "and the thing that was inside it isn't going anywhere either." He hadn't planned to say that. It came out of somewhere instinctive, a need to let whoever was watching know that they were too late, that whatever they'd hoped to prevent from being discovered had already been discovered. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Just briefly. Just a flicker of something that Logan filed away. "You should think carefully about your situation," the man said. "I am thinking carefully about it," Logan said. "That's why I'm saying no." He stepped back from the window. "Don't park here again." He walked back across the street. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest, but his face was calm and his hands were steady, and he went back into the shop and told Denny what had just happened, and Denny listened without interrupting and then said, "I'm going to start coming in an hour earlier." And that was the end of that conversation. 3 days later, an offer arrived by certified mail. It was from a company called Western Property Advisors, LLC, and it offered to purchase the vintage motorcycle currently being restored at Raymond's Repair for $45,000, along with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Logan from discussing the motorcycle or its contents with any third parties. Logan photographed the letter, added it to his documentation file, and put the original in the fireproof box in his office. He wrote back a single sentence: "The motorcycle is not for sale, and I will not be signing any agreement." He mailed it the same day. That night, alone in the garage after Denny had gone home, he sat for a long time looking at the Harley, which was now more assembled than disassembled. The frame gleaming under his new powder coat, the engine rebuilt and ready, the chrome components coming back from the shop in Bozeman, one by one. Each piece restored to something better than it had been before. The Wolf's head markings had been carefully preserved and reapplied. Every modification Eddie Reyes had made to this machine was intact, documented, honored. Logan put his hand on the tank. He thought about a man he'd never met who'd ridden this machine across the country in pursuit of something he believed in, and who had hidden the truth of what he'd found inside the one thing he'd loved most, and who had disappeared before he could see it matter. "I've got you," Logan said quietly. "I'm not going to let it stop with me." He went back to work. The Harley wasn't finished yet, but it was getting close. And when it was done, Logan had decided the world was going to see it, all of it, every piece of what this machine was, and who it had belonged to, and what it had carried through 26 years of silence. He just needed a little more time. He didn't know yet that time was about to become something he had considerably less of. The call came on a Friday morning. Logan was in the middle of installing the restored front fork assembly, a delicate job that required complete concentration, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him pick up. "Is this Logan Carter?" The voice was male, older, with a controlled quality to it, not cold exactly, but measured the voice of someone who chose their words deliberately. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Hayes. I understand you've been working on a motorcycle that belonged to a friend of mine." Logan set down his tools very carefully. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in years. Not the complicated rhythm of stress or adrenaline, but something cleaner and more surprising. Something that felt almost impossibly like relief. "Marcus," he said, "I've been waiting for you to call." A pause. "How do you know my name?" "Because Eddie wrote about you," Logan said. "He wrote about you more than anyone else. He trusted you. And I think—" He stopped and took a breath. "I think you're the person this was all meant for." The silence on the other end of the line was long enough that Logan checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "I've been looking for that bike for 26 years, Marcus Hayes said finally. His voice had changed. It was still controlled, still measured, But underneath the control, there was something that Logan recognized because he'd felt it himself, the specific emotion of finding something you had given up ever finding. I've been looking for Eddie for 26 years. I know, Logan said. I know you have. The bike. It's almost done, Logan said. I've restored it. It's almost done. He paused. You need to come see it. Another silence. Yes, Marcus Hayes said. I do. He was coming to Millbrook, and he wasn't going to come alone. Marcus Hayes arrived on a Sunday. Logan knew it was him before the man even stepped out of the truck. A dark pickup, nothing flashy. Montana plates pulling into the gravel lot of Raymond's Repair, just after 9 in the morning. The way the truck sat for almost a full minute before the door opened told Logan everything. The man inside was preparing himself, getting ready to see something he'd spent 26 years imagining. The door opened and Marcus Hayes stepped out. He was somewhere in his late 60s, broad through the shoulders, with silver hair cut close, and a face that had lived in it, not old in the way that meant diminished, but old in the way that meant accumulated. He wore a plain dark jacket and jeans and boots, nothing to identify him as anything, and he stood in the gravel lot and looked at the front of Raymond's Repair with an expression that Logan couldn't quite read from the window where he was watching. Logan walked out to meet him. They stood about 8 feet apart in the gravel and looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Logan Carter, Marcus said. Marcus Hayes. You look like your father. Logan went still. You knew him. I knew of him. Eddie talked about him, said Raymond Carter was the straightest man he'd met in Montana, and that was saying something because Montana wasn't exactly short on straight men. Marcus looked at the garage. Is it inside? Yeah. Can I see it? That's why you're here. Logan led him through the front and back through the shop to the rear bay. He'd finished the Harley 2 days before, or as finished as it was going to be for this moment, which was finished enough. The chrome had come back from the shop in Bozeman and gone on piece by piece over the course of a full day, Logan working alone, handling each component with the kind of care you give to something that doesn't belong to you. The Wolf's head markings were clean and precise against the black of the engine cases. The paint on the tank was new, but matched the original color, a deep burgundy so dark it was almost black, which he'd determined from a fragment of original finish protected inside one of the custom brackets. The Harley stood in the center of the bay under the work lights. Marcus stopped in the doorway. He didn't say anything for a long time. He walked in slowly the way Logan had walked into the warehouse on that first rainy afternoon, with the same careful distance, the same instinct to take it in completely before getting close. He circled the bike once. Then he stopped at the left side and just stood there. Logan watched him. Marcus reached out and touched the tank with one hand. Just the flat of his palm pressed against the metal, and he kept it there, and his face did something that it was clear he hadn't intended it to do in front of a stranger. He looked away from Logan for a moment. Then he looked back. He built this himself, Marcus said. Took him 2 years. He had a specific vision for it, wouldn't let anybody else touch the fabrication. I used to tell him he was too particular. He paused. I never met a machine that suited a man the way this one suited Eddie. I know, Logan said. I could feel that while I was working on it. Marcus looked at him. What do you mean? I mean the decisions he made, every modification, every custom component, they weren't random. They were intentional. Everything on this bike is the way it is because Eddie Reyes had a specific reason for it. You can read a man in the way he builds something. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What did you read? Someone who was precise, patient. Someone who cared about things lasting, not just looking good, but actually holding up. He over-engineered a lot of the structural elements which most people wouldn't bother with, but which means the frame is in better shape than anything from this era should be. Logan paused. And he was careful. Careful in the way that comes from paying attention, from knowing that details matter. Marcus absorbed this. He looked at the motorcycle for another long moment. Then he said very quietly, I should have found it sooner. You didn't know where it was. I should have looked harder. Marcus? Logan waited until the older man met his eyes. He hid it well on purpose. He wanted it hidden. He was protecting you. Something moved across Marcus Hayes' face at that, not grief exactly, but the specific expression of someone who has carried a burden for so long that they've forgotten what it would feel like to set it down and who is now being told that they might be allowed to. You read the journal, he said. All of it, multiple times. Then you know what happened to him. I know what he wrote, Logan said carefully. I know what he believed was going to happen. I don't know the facts of what actually did because nobody around here seems willing to say it plainly. Walt Greer told me he disappeared. You're the first person I've talked to who knew him. Marcus sat down on the shop stool Logan had set near the workbench. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, and he looked at the floor for a moment. Eddie was the best man I ever knew, he said. That's not an easy thing to say because I've known a lot of men over a lot of years, and some of them were genuinely exceptional. But Eddie was the kind of man who couldn't look away from something wrong. He wasn't a crusader. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't make speeches. He just couldn't look away. Once he knew about something, he had to do something about it. It was just how he was made. He paused. The land thing he found out through a connection in the network the way you do. And he started pulling on the thread the way he always did, and the thread turned out to connect to something a lot bigger than a land deal. It connected to people with serious resources and serious motivation to protect what they'd built. He named 3 of them in the letter, Logan said. 2 businessmen and a local official. We know one of those names is still active, Marcus said, still operating in this region. The other 2, one died in 2004, the other relocated. But the network they built didn't disappear when they did. Meridian Land Holdings. Marcus looked at him. You did your homework. I've been doing homework for 6 weeks. The company still exists, I checked. Different structure, now different faces, but the ownership traces back through enough shell layers that it gets murky. I have a lawyer friend in Missoula who helped me map it. Marcus studied him. You're more prepared than I expected. Eddie said in his letter that whoever found the bike was the right person, Logan said. I've been trying to be worth that. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Logan, what do you want to do with what you've found? I want to finish it, Logan said. Eddie spent 4 years building a case and died for it. That case has been sitting in the belly of that motorcycle for 26 years. I want to get it to people who can actually do something with it, and I want the families who were hurt to know what happened, and I want whoever's still operating to understand that the evidence didn't disappear when Eddie did. He paused. And I want it done right. I don't want to hand this to the wrong people and watch it get buried again. Marcus looked at him for a long time. There's something you don't know yet, Marcus said. The shift in his voice was subtle, but Logan caught it immediately, the deliberate quality of someone choosing the moment carefully. Tell me, Logan said. One of the families Eddie was trying to help, the Kowalski family, 3rd on his list. Marcus paused. Eddie was in contact with a woman in that family, a young woman at the time. Her name was Anna Kowalski. Eddie trusted her completely. He was giving her copies of some of the documentation he was building in case something happened to him. Logan felt something cold and clarifying move through him. Mrs. Kowalski, he said, my neighbor. She's been in Millbrook this whole time. She's been bringing me casseroles since my dad's funeral, Logan said. He heard how strange that sounded. She knew. She's known where the bike was all along. She knew it was on my father's property. She was protecting you, Marcus said, the same way Raymond was protecting Eddie. Sometimes the people who care about you most do it from a distance, because the distance is the safest place for them to stand. Logan sat down on the stool across from Marcus and put his face in his hands for a moment. 26 years of silence. His father keeping a promise to a dead man. Anna Kowalski watching from across the street, bringing food, saying nothing, waiting. And now Logan himself alone in a garage at 2 a.m, reading a dead man's words and deciding without fully understanding what he was deciding to follow them forward. I need to talk to her, Logan said. Yes, Marcus said. You do. He went that afternoon. Mrs. Kowalski Anna answered the door quickly as though she'd been expecting him, which he realized after a moment that she probably had. She was a small woman in her late 70s, sharp eyes behind glasses, hair the color of winter sky. She'd lived alone since her husband passed 8 years ago. Logan had always registered her as simply kind, the kind of neighbor who notices when you forget to eat. He understood now that she was considerably more than that. She stood in the doorway and looked at him and didn't say anything. You knew, Logan said. Come inside, she said. He sat at her kitchen table and she sat across from him, and she poured them both coffee without asking, and then she folded her hands on the table and looked at him directly. Your father told me the day you found the key, she said. Logan stared at her. He told you? When did he? He left me a letter, to be opened after he was gone. I received it 3 days after the funeral. He knew he was getting sick, Logan. He knew before anyone else because that was how your father operated. He understood things before he'd explain them. She wrapped her hands around her mug. The letter said that the time might come when someone went into the warehouse and found what was stored there. He said if that happened, I should watch and see what they did with it. If they walked away, I should leave it alone. If they started working on it, if they started to look inside, then I should know that the right person had found it. So you were watching, Logan said. From the day you drove out there the first time, I saw your truck. She met his eyes. I've been watching for 6 weeks, and I've been thanking Raymond every day. Logan was quiet for a moment. The coffee was too hot to drink, but he held the mug anyway because he needed something to hold. Tell me about Eddie Reyes, he said. Anna Kowalski looked at the table for a moment, gathering something. Eddie was the kind of man you don't forget, she said. I was young. I was 23 when all of this started. My family was in trouble. The pressure on the land had started, and my father didn't understand what was happening to him. Why suddenly there were lawyers involved and documents he hadn't signed and people showing up to talk to him about things he didn't want to talk about. He felt like the ground was shifting underneath him. Literally. She paused. Someone in the network reached out and Eddie showed up. Just like that. Just like that. On that motorcycle. She looked over at the window as though she could see past it. He came to the farm and he talked to my father for 3 hours, and at the end of those 3 hours, my father understood for the first time what was actually happening and why. And he cried, not because someone had explained the bad thing, because someone had shown up to help. Her voice tightened briefly before she controlled it. You have to understand. My father was a man who'd worked that land his entire life. His father before him. He'd never asked anyone for anything. And here was this man, this Hell's Angels rider, who nobody who looked at him would have expected to be sitting at a farmhouse kitchen table, and he was the one person who came. And he kept coming, Logan said. For 2 years. He built that case piece by piece. He was careful the way Eddie was careful about everything. He gave me copies of documents to hold in case something happened to him. I had them for years until my family's situation changed and we had to move temporarily, and some things were lost in storage. Her jaw tightened. Not everything, but enough that what I had wasn't complete without what Eddie had built into the bike. So that's why both pieces matter, Logan said. That's why both pieces have always mattered. Eddie knew that. He structured it that way deliberately. She looked at him. He was protecting everyone. The information was split between places so that if one was found, it wouldn't be the whole picture. You needed both. Logan sat with this for a moment. The architecture of what Eddie Reyes had built, not just a case, but a system, a distributed preservation of truth designed to survive, even if he didn't, was something that deserved more than the word impressive. It deserves something closer to reverence. Marcus is here, Logan said. He came this morning. Anna closed her eyes for a brief moment. Marcus, she said softly. He's been looking for Eddie for 26 years. I know. I tried to reach him after Eddie was gone, but I didn't know the right channels and I was afraid, and I had my family to think about. She opened her eyes. I've carried that for a long time, not reaching him. He's here now, Logan said. He's going to want to talk to you. I know, she said. I'm ready. I've been ready for a long time. She reached across the table and put her hand over Logan's briefly and firmly the way his mother used to. Your father kept his promise, Logan. For 26 years, he kept it. And now you're keeping it forward. That's not a small thing. Logan looked down at the table. He didn't trust his voice for a moment. Marcus and Anna met that evening in Logan's garage, which felt the right place, the space where everything was happening, with the restored Harley standing between them like a mediator or a witness. Logan stood to the side and let them have the first moments without him. Marcus walked in and stopped when he saw Anna. She was standing near the motorcycle, her hand resting lightly on the handlebars. They looked at each other across the distance of the garage and across the distance of 26 years and all the specific weight that distance carried. You're Anna, Marcus said. You're Marcus, she said. Eddie talked about you constantly. He said you were the most infuriating man he'd ever met and the one he'd trust with anything. Marcus made a sound that was almost a laugh. That's about right. He looked at the Harley. He talked about you too. He said you were the bravest person involved in any of it because you had the most to lose. I had family to protect, Anna said simply. He had a conscience. Different kinds of brave. They stood in the garage together, the three of them, and Logan started a pot of coffee on the old machine his father had kept in the corner of the shop. Raymond had always said a garage needed coffee, the way a church needed pews, and they talked for 3 hours. It wasn't a comfortable conversation. It was the kind of conversation that people who have been carrying heavy things for a long time have when they finally agree to set those things down in the same room. It had hard silences and harder words, and at one point Anna put her face in her hands for a moment, and nobody filled the silence because some silences don't need to be filled. But what came out of it was something Logan hadn't expected going in, not just more information. Though there was more information, but a clarity of purpose that all three of them could feel taking shape in the room. What we have between us, Marcus said, is the documentation Eddie built inside that bike, plus whatever you've documented in the last 6 weeks, plus what Anna held on to. And we have the fact that Meridian's principal structure is still active. That's not a coincidence. Those kinds of structures persist because they're designed to. I've been building the document, Logan said. Everything from the journal, everything from the letter, everything I've researched. I have a friend in Missoula, a lawyer named Christine Park, who works with land rights cases. She's the one who helped me trace the corporate structure. Do you trust her? Marcus asked. My father did, Logan said. That's enough for me. Marcus nodded slowly. We need to get this to people who can actually move it. Not local law, Eddie was right about that, and some things don't change. But there are federal agencies with jurisdiction over land fraud of this scale, and there are journalists who specialize in exactly this kind of corporate malfeasance. I know a journalist, Anna said. Both men looked at her. My granddaughter, she said quietly. She's investigative works out of Denver. She's been waiting for me to say the word for 3 years. Logan looked at her. You told her, not everything. I told her there was something. I told her it wasn't time yet. Anna looked at the motorcycle. I think it's time. The atmosphere in Millbrook shifted the following week in ways that Logan registered as subtle until they weren't. The dark SUV didn't come back after he'd confronted the driver, but 3 days after Marcus arrived, a different kind of presence appeared. A car he didn't recognize, different from before, that parked not across the street, but a block away, visible only if you knew to look for it. Someone had upgraded their surveillance. Someone was paying attention to who was coming and going from Raymond's repair. Logan told Marcus. They've been watching you since before I got here, Marcus said. He wasn't surprised. Whatever you said to that man outside about the thing inside the bike that got to someone, and that someone made calls. So they know I found the compartment. They suspected it. Now they're more confident. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This is going to accelerate, Logan. The offer you got that was the polite phase. People operating the way these people operate don't stay in the polite phase once they're certain you're not going to take the offer. What comes after the polite phase? Pressure, Marcus said. Coercion. Legal first. They'll look for anything they can use. Code violations. Permit issues, debt structures they can get leverage on. You said you took a loan for the restoration. Small bank in Billings. Who referred you to that bank? Logan thought about it. Tom Briggs, he said slowly. Tom Briggs gave me the name. He said they were good for small business loans. Marcus looked at him steadily. Logan felt something cold settle in his chest. Tom Briggs, who called Denny to warn me off the bike. People in these networks, Marcus said, are not always aware of the full picture of what they're involved in. Sometimes they're just convenient, used for specific purposes without knowing the full context. He paused. I'm not saying Briggs is dirty. I'm saying you should know who's in your orbit. Logan pulled out his phone and called Christine Park. She answered on the second ring. Logan, I've been waiting to hear from you. We need to move faster than I thought, he said. How quickly can you get here? I can be there Thursday, she said. I already have most of what you sent me organized. And Logan, I found something in my research that you need to know about. The corporate structure of Meridian Land Holdings connects to a current infrastructure contract with the state of Montana. Active contract. Significant money. Whatever they were doing in the 90s, they've been continuing, and they're currently positioned to profit from a highway expansion that runs through the same county where those original families were displaced. Logan gripped the phone. They never stopped. They never stopped, Christine confirmed, and the families who were pushed off that land, some of them are now directly in the path of the expansion. They're being approached again. Different company name, same ownership trace. He hung up and looked at Marcus. It's still happening, Logan said. The families. They're being approached again right now. Marcus stood up from the stool. Something in his posture changed, not anger exactly, but resolution. The body language of a man shifting from waiting mode into forward motion. How many families, he said. I don't know yet. Christine is finding out. We need to know now. I know. Logan was already reaching for his jacket. Anna will know. Some of those original families are still connected to her. Then let's go. Anna Kowalski's kitchen table became over the next 4 days something like a command center. This was not how Logan had pictured any of this going. He'd had a vague idea of responsible handoffs, orderly transfers of information to appropriate authorities, a clean, logical chain from discovery to resolution. What actually happened was considerably more human than that and considerably more urgent. Anna knew of 4 families from Eddie's original list who were still on land in the county. Of those 4, 2 had already been contacted by representatives of a company called Cascade Development Partners, which Christine confirmed over the phone from Missoula, traced back through 3 corporate layers to the same principal ownership as Meridian Land Holdings. Different name, same hands. The families were frightened. One of them, an elderly man named Gerald Fuchs, who'd been farming the same property for 40 years, had already signed a preliminary agreement under circumstances that his daughter described to Anna as he didn't understand what he was signing, and they were very friendly about it. We need to talk to Gerald, Logan said. I know Gerald, Anna said. He'll talk to me. What about the other family, the one who hasn't signed? The Washingtons, younger second generation. The daughter runs the operation now. She's sharp, she knows something's wrong, but she doesn't have the resource to fight it. Marcus had been listening quietly. What she needs is not to be alone, he said. That's what Eddie was trying to give these families 26 years ago. The knowledge that someone was standing with them. He paused. We can do that. Right now. Today. Logan looked at him. You came here alone. I came here to see the bike, Marcus said. The rest of this is going to require more people. He met Logan's eyes. I need to make some calls. Is that all right with you? Who are you calling? People who've been waiting for a reason to be useful, Marcus said. People who owed Eddie something and never got a chance to pay it. He paused. Brothers. Logan understood. Make the calls, he said. Marcus went outside to use his phone and Logan went back to the garage to think, and Denny found him there an hour later, standing in front of the Harley with his arms crossed. You look like a man with a plan that's bigger than he expected, Denny said. Oh, something like that. You want to tell me what's happening, the whole thing, because I've been watching pieces of this for weeks and I'd like the complete picture, Logan told him. All of it, the compartment, the journal, Eddie Reyes, Anna Kowalski, Marcus Hayes, Meridian Land Holdings, Christine Park. The family's being approached again right now. He talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and Denny stood against the workbench with his arms crossed and his expression going through a series of changes that went from skeptical to serious to something that looked almost like anger. When Logan finished, Denny was quiet for a long time. Your dad knew all of this, Denny said finally. Most of it. He knew about Eddie and the bike. I don't know if he knew the details of what Eddie had built. Eddie might have protected him from that on purpose, so he could keep the promise without being implicated in anything. 26 years, Denny said. He shook his head slowly. That's the weight your dad was carrying. I think so. And you didn't see it. I was a kid, and he was good at carrying things without showing it. Denny was quiet again. Then he said, what did you need from me? Right now, keep the shop running. Keep things normal looking. People are watching, and I don't want to give whoever's watching a reason to accelerate their timeline before we're ready. And when you're ready, I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, Logan admitted. But Marcus is making calls, and I think he stopped and thought about how to say the next thing. I think it's going to look like more than I anticipated. When something this big has been suppressed for 26 years and then it breaks loud, Denny said. Yeah, Denny nodded slowly. All right, I'll keep the bays full. He looked at the Harley. She looks good, by the way. You did right by her. I had good material to work with. Denny picked up his jacket from the hook and shrugged into it. He stopped at the door. Logan, one more thing. Yeah, be careful with the loan. I've been thinking about what you said about Briggs, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I'm already on it. Good. Denny went out. Logan stood alone in the garage with the Harley. He thought about Eddie Reyes, who had stood in the same physical space in his mind for 6 weeks, the ghost of a man he'd never met but felt he knew. And he thought about what Eddie had written in that last journal entry. Somebody will find it someday. Somebody will do something with it. I have to believe that, or I can't write this last line. I found it, Logan said quietly. I'm doing something with it. The work light hummed above the motorcycle. Outside, the sound of Marcus's voice carried faintly from the gravel lot, calm, measured, authoritative, as the older man made the calls that would set the next phase of all of this into motion. Logan thought about what Marcus had said that morning when they'd gone over the timeline of the case and what it would take to bring it properly to light. He'd said something that Logan had written in his notebook verbatim because it felt like the kind of thing worth keeping. In 26 years of looking for Eddie, I found out that the truth doesn't actually disappear. It just waits. It waits for the person willing to hold it. Logan looked at the motorcycle, at the chrome he'd restored piece by piece, the engine he'd rebuilt from the crankshaft up the wolf's head markings he'd preserved with the same deliberate care with which they'd been made. A machine that had been given up on by everyone who'd seen it. A machine that had been carrying something extraordinary inside itself for 26 years without anyone knowing. It was finished now. It was whole. It was better than it had been, not different, not changed into something other than what Eddie had made it, but the best version of itself, fully realized, capable of carrying what it had always been meant to carry. Logan opened his laptop. He had documentation to finish. And somewhere outside, Marcus Hayes was on the phone with brothers who had been waiting 26 years for a reason to move, and the world that had been holding its breath since 1996 was just beginning to exhale. Christine Park arrived Thursday morning with a leather briefcase, a laptop bag, a portable hard drive, and the focused energy of someone who'd been waiting for this specific conversation for longer than she could comfortably explain. She was 43, Korean-American, with a precision about her that reminded Logan of a surgeon, not cold but exact, the kind of person who doesn't waste a word or a gesture. She'd been a land rights attorney in Montana for 15 years, and she had the particular quality of someone who has spent those years watching people get hurt by systems designed to be too complicated to fight, and who had never quite made peace with it. Logan brought her straight through the shop to the garage bay where the Harley was. He'd noticed that everyone who came into this situation came into it through the motorcycle first, as though the machine itself needed to be acknowledged before any business could begin. Christine stopped in front of it without being prompted. She put her briefcase down and looked at it for a moment. Eddie Reyes built this, she said. Every custom element, Logan said. 2 years of work. And he hid the evidence inside the tank. Compartment welded to the underside, hidden panel, waterproof. Christine looked at the tank for a long moment. Then she picked up her briefcase. All right, show me everything you've built. They sat at the work table Logan had set up in the corner of the bay, the same table where he'd been doing his documentation work for 6 weeks, and Logan opened his laptop and walked her through it. The transcribed journal entries, the letter from Eddie, the photographs of the original documents shot under careful lighting to maximize legibility. The corporate mapping he'd done with her remote help, now organized into a visual diagram showing the ownership structure of Meridian Land Holdings and its successor entities, the current Cascade Development Partners filing, the active state infrastructure contract. Christine didn't interrupt. She read everything he put in front of her with the intensity of someone eating after a long, fast, thorough, systematic, occasionally stopping to type a note into her own laptop. Marcus sat to one side, quiet, letting the legal process take its shape. When Logan finished presenting, Christine sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Okay, she said. That's all you've got, Logan said. Okay means I'm processing. Give me a second. She looked back at her screen. What you have here is a foundation. Eddie's documentation from the 90s establishes the original pattern, the methodology they used to acquire land, the specific individuals directing it, the nature of the coercion. That's historical, but it's not irrelevant because the same ownership structure is currently active. The continuity of the enterprise is actually what makes this prosecutable at a federal level. If this were just a historical fraud, the statute of limitations might be a problem. But Cascade Development Partners is operating right now. Gerald Fuchs signed a preliminary agreement 2 weeks ago under circumstances that at minimum warrant investigation and at maximum constitute elder fraud. Can we get Gerald's agreement invalidated? Marcus asked. Possibly. Probably if we move quickly and if Gerald is willing to say that he didn't understand what he was signing, which his daughter has already told Anna he wasn't. Christine paused. But the more important thing right now is protecting the Washington family from signing anything. If they sign, we lose the clean comparison case, someone who agreed versus someone who refused, and comparison cases are how you show pattern. Pattern is everything in land fraud prosecution. How long do we have? Logan asked. Days, not weeks. These contracts are designed to close quickly for exactly this reason. They don't want people having time to think. She looked at Logan. I need to make some calls today. I have a contact at the FBI field office in Helena who handles financial crimes. I also know a reporter at the Montana Independent different from Anna's granddaughter, but we might want both angles covered. Anna's granddaughter is coming tomorrow, Logan said. Her name is Mia. She works investigative out of Denver. Christine looked at him and then at Marcus. How many people know what you have here? Everyone in this garage, Logan said. Denny, Walt Greer, who told me about Eddie in the first place. Mrs. Kowalski, Anna, and now you. That's already more than I'd like at this stage, Christine said. Not because I don't trust these people, because every additional person is a potential leak, and the people on the other side of this have demonstrated they are paying attention. They have already been watching, Logan said. They know something's changed. The man who came to offer me money that was weeks ago, the surveillance on the shop that started after I told him I'd found what was inside the bike. Christine's expression sharpened. You told him that. I implied it. Logan, she looked at him steadily. That was either brave or very reckless, and I haven't decided which. Maybe both, Marcus said quietly. Probably both, Logan agreed. Christine was quiet for a moment. Then all right. Then we operate on the assumption that they know the timeline is moving, which means we need to move faster than they expect. She stood up. I need to start making calls. Do you have a room I can use? Logan pointed her toward the small office his father had used, a room that still smelled slightly of Raymond's particular brand of coffee and machine oil, as though the man's habits had outlasted him. Christine went in, closed the door, and within 30 seconds, Logan could hear the low, precise cadence of her on the phone. Marcus looked at Logan. She's good, Marcus said. The best I know, Logan said. My dad used her twice over the years, different issues, nothing like this scale. He trusted her. Your father's judgment on people seems to have been sound. It was better than his judgment on his own health, Logan said, and there was something in his voice that he hadn't intended to put there, something that surprised him when he heard it. Marcus looked at him. He knew he was sick, Logan said. He kept it quiet, dealt with things on his own. That was Raymond Carter's particular flaw, if you could call it a flaw. He protected everyone around him from difficulty, and then he died without giving anyone the chance to protect him back. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Eddie was the same way, he said. 26 years I've thought about what I would have done differently if I'd known what he was walking into. The answer is nothing, because he wouldn't have let me do anything. He would have smiled and said it was handled and ridden away on that bike, and that would have been the last I'd have seen of him. He paused. We love people like that, and they drive us half out of our minds. Logan looked at the motorcycle. Yeah, he said, Mia Kowalski arrived the following afternoon in a 10-year-old Subaru with a press credential hanging from the rearview mirror and the look of someone who'd been driving fast for 6 hours and was unhappy about being asked to slow down now. She was 29, Anna's granddaughter, with the same sharp eyes and the same quality of paying more attention than she appeared to be paying. She was a little shorter than Logan had expected and considerably more direct. She shook Logan's hand at the door of the shop and said, My grandmother called me 3 years ago and said there was a story waiting in Millbrook. I want to hear everything you have. Don't leave anything out because you think I can't handle it. I wasn't going to, Logan said. Good. She came inside and stopped when she saw the Harley and looked at it for a moment with her head slightly tilted, the way she probably looked at everything she was taking in for the first time. This is the bike. This is the bike. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph without asking. Logan let it go. Who else is here? She asked. Marcus Hayes, Christine Park, my mechanic Denny. Your grandmother is coming at 4. Mia looked up from her phone. Marcus Hayes is here in this building. In the office on the phone, he's been here 4 days. Marcus Iron Wolf Hayes, she said. National figure in the Hells Angels, known for 20 years of advocacy work with land rights organizations in the Midwest and Mountain West, 3 appearances before Senate subcommittees on organized crime and community relations. She paused. I did my research when my grandmother told me his name. Then you know who Eddie Reyes was, Logan said. Disappeared writer, connection to a land fraud case in Fontana in the 90s. His name appears in 4 documents in the federal archives related to an investigation that was closed in 1998, closed not resolved. The investigation just stopped. She looked at Logan. Do you know why? The letter inside the bike named a local official, Logan said. Christine is working on figuring out how far up that went. Mia Kowalski looked at him with an expression that on a different kind of person might have been excitement, but on her manifested as something more concentrated, more purposeful. Okay, she said, I need to see everything. The next 3 hours were different from anything Logan had experienced in the previous weeks of carefully managed information. Mia worked the way journalists apparently work, not sequentially, not from beginning to middle to end, but associatively jumping from one thread to another, asking questions that seemed sideways until they weren't pulling connections out of the material that Logan hadn't seen himself. Christine came out of the office at one point, and the two of them fell into a rapid professional exchange that Logan and Marcus watched from the workbench. The 1998 closure, Mia said. I need the name of the supervising official. I have 3 candidates, Christine said. I'm narrowing. The Cascade Development Partner state contract, is it publicly disclosed? Yes, Montana Public Records. It cleared the legislature's Appropriations Committee in March. Who sits on that committee? I have the committee roster. Christine pulled up a screen on her laptop and turned it toward Mia. Mia looked at it for about 4 seconds and then pointed to a name. Him, she said. Christine looked at her. What makes you say that? Because he's 3rd term, which means he's been in long enough to have relationships from the 90s, and his district covers 2 of the 3 counties in Eddie's original documentation. She paused. And because his name appears in one of the federal archive documents I pulled, as a character reference for one of the businessmen Eddie named. The silence in the garage had a specific quality. Marcus said very quietly, You found that before you got here. I found it yesterday, Mia said. I needed to come and see what you had before I knew what it meant. Logan looked at Christine. Christine was looking at Mia with an expression that was either professional respect or professional wariness, possibly both. If you publish anything before the federal contact is made, Christine said, we risk. I know the risk, Mia said. I've been sitting on this story for 3 years out of respect for my grandmother's judgment. I'm not going to blow it in the last mile. She looked at Christine directly. But I need to know the timeline, because once you make federal contact, the timeline is no longer ours. It was never ours, Christine said. It was more ours than it will be afterward. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Christine nodded very slightly. 48 hours, she said. I need 48 hours to get the right person on the phone and brief them properly. After that, we align on what gets reported and when. Mia looked at Logan. Is that all right with you? She asked. It's your story. Logan thought about it. He thought about Eddie Reyes, who had spent 4 years building this case and who had structured every piece of it, the journal, the letter, the split documentation, with the deliberate intelligence of someone who understood that the truth needed the right architecture to survive. He thought about what Eddie had written in the last journal entry. Somebody will do something with it. Do it right, Logan said. That's all I care about. Do it the way it deserves to be done. The 48 hours passed. Christine got her call. The person on the other end was a federal agent named Delaney. She didn't share more than the last name, who had apparently been aware of the 1998 closed investigation and who listened to Christine's briefing with the particular quality of professional attention that meant the information was landing on prepared ground. Something had been investigated before. Something had been stopped before it finished. The awareness of that history made the new evidence more significant, not less. After the call, Christine came out of the office and stood in the middle of the garage and said, "We're moving, officially." Logan felt something release in his chest, not relaxation exactly, more like the physical sensation of a gear engaging of a mechanism that has been under tension finally beginning to move. "How long?" Marcus asked. "They'll want to review everything before any overt action. But they're taking it seriously. The current contract, the act of fraud, that's their entry point. Everything Eddie built is corroborating history." She paused. "The person who ran the 1998 investigation and then quietly shut it down," Delaney confirmed, "he's still in a position of relevance. That's a significant problem for the other side, because it changes the shape of the case from historical land fraud to something that includes obstruction of a prior federal investigation." Marcus was very still. "Who shut it down?" Christine looked at him. "The name in the archive is a man named Harold Brennan. He was a regional supervisor in 1998. He's currently a senior advisor to the state legislature's Natural Resources Committee." Marcus's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "You knew that name?" Logan said. "Eddie mentioned him," Marcus said. "In passing, as someone who he'd tried to approach and who had not helped." He paused. 26 years that man has been sitting in this state with what he did. 26 years. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Logan's phone rang. He looked at the screen and didn't recognize the number. He picked up. "Mr. Carter," said a voice he didn't know, male, smooth, with the specific over-casualness of someone performing relaxation. "I represent certain interests that have an ongoing concern about a matter you've been researching. I want you to know that we're aware of the meetings you've been having, and we're aware of the calls your attorney made this morning." Logan went very still. He made eye contact with Christine and put the call on speaker without breaking the eye contact. "You've been busy," the voice continued. "We understand that. We even respect it in a manner of speaking. Young man finds something interesting, does his homework, tries to do the right thing. It's admirable. But you're about to step into a situation that has consequences for a lot of people, and some of those people have resources that you don't fully understand." "I think I understand them pretty well by now," Logan said. "I don't think you do. You've been looking at documents and building spreadsheets and talking to a lawyer. That's all very earnest. But what you're proposing to set in motion affects contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the careers of multiple public officials, and the reputations of people who have spent decades building significant influence in this state." The voice paused. "We'd like to make one more offer, significantly larger than the first one. Large enough that a young man in your situation, inheriting debt, trying to save a failing business, would be able to walk away from all of this and build something genuinely substantial." "What's the number?" Logan asked. Christine's expression sharpened. She hadn't expected him to ask. $250,000, the voice said, "for the motorcycle, the journal, the letter, and a legal agreement that ends your involvement." The garage was completely silent. Logan looked at Marcus. Marcus's face was unreadable. He looked at Christine. She gave him the smallest possible shake of her head, not advice, just acknowledgement. He thought about Eddie Reyes dead at 40-something, with his truth locked inside a motorcycle he'd built with his own hands. He thought about his father carrying the weight of that locked warehouse for 26 years. He thought about Gerald Fuchs, an old man who'd signed something he didn't understand because someone had been very friendly about it. He thought about the 12 families in that letter. "No," he said, a pause. "Mr. Carter, I said no. Don't call this number again." He ended the call. Christine let out a slow breath. "Logan, I know they were listening to your calls somehow. We need to assume everything from this point is compromised. Or they had someone inside the federal contact chain," Mia said from the back of the garage, where she'd come in quietly at some point during the call. She was typing. "That's the more concerning possibility." Marcus stood up. "This ends in the next 24 hours, he said. "One way or another, the window for careful and organized is closing. What do you need to do to be ready?" "The documentation is complete," Christine said. "I have it backed up in 3 separate locations, including a secure server and a physical copy in a safe in my office in Missoula." "Mia," Logan said. "The article is written," she said. "Has been since yesterday. It just needs a publication decision." Logan looked at Marcus. Marcus said, "Make the call." It was Denny who noticed them first. He came in through the back door of the shop at 6:30 the following morning, 2 hours before Logan, who had barely slept, and he stood outside the rear bay door for a long moment before he came inside. When Logan arrived at 8:15 and found Denny in the kitchen with his arms crossed in an expression that meant something specific, he stopped. "What?" Logan said. "Go look at the road," Denny said. Logan went to the front window of the shop and looked at the road. There were motorcycles. Not a few, not a handful. They were parked along the street in both directions, as far as he could see from the window, and there were more coming. He could hear them now that he was paying attention. A low rolling sound that he'd registered as background noise when he pulled in, but that he now understood for what it was. Engines. A lot of them. He went to the front door and opened it. The sight stopped him completely. The street in front of Raymond's repair was lined with Hell's Angels as far as he could see in both directions. Men and women, all ages, some of them leaning against their bikes, some standing in small groups talking, some simply waiting. Their cuts were visible, even from this distance, the patches and colors of a dozen different chapters. More bikes were still arriving, turning onto the street from the main road with the deliberate, unhurried pace of people who know exactly where they're going and don't need to hurry to get there. Logan stood into the doorway and tried to count and gave up after 40. Marcus appeared at his shoulder. "I made some calls," Marcus said. "You said that," Logan said. His voice was doing something he hadn't authorized it to do. "I didn't know how many calls." "I called everyone who ever rode with Eddie," Marcus said, "and everyone who ever rode with them." He paused. "Word travels fast in the community when the right person makes the call." A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled up on a Harley directly in front of the shop, parked it, took off her helmet, and looked at Logan with direct, assessing eyes. "You're Logan Carter," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Sandra Reyes," she said. "Eddie was my brother." Logan was very still. Sandra Reyes stepped off her bike and walked across the sidewalk and stopped in front of him. She was not a tall woman, but she had the quality of someone who didn't need height to fill a space. She looked at him for a moment with the eyes of someone who has spent 26 years waiting for this specific conversation and has prepared herself thoroughly for it. "I heard you fixed his bike," she said. "Yes." "I heard you did it right." "I tried to." "Can I see it?" Logan stepped back from the door to let her in. She stopped in front of the Harley, and she didn't touch it the way Marcus had. She stood further back, her hands at her sides, and she looked at it from a distance, and Logan watched her face and saw on it something that was beyond grief, beyond gratitude, beyond any single emotion he could name. It was the face of someone completing something. "He built this the summer he turned 38, she said without looking away from the bike. "He worked on it in the evenings in a garage he rented. He'd come in on Saturday mornings sometimes with grease on his hands. And this particular expression, he always had this expression when something was going the way he'd imagined it would go, like he was surprised by his own competence." Her voice was controlled, but just barely. "He showed it to me when it was done. He said, 'Sandra, I finally built the thing I was trying to build.'" I asked him what he meant. He said some things take a long time to figure out, but once you know what you're making, the work goes fast. Logan looked at the motorcycle. "He was talking about more than the bike," he said. "Yes," she said. "He was." She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to look at Logan directly. "I want to thank you," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. "You're 22 years old, and you inherited a problem that has been building since before you were born, and you didn't walk away from it. You didn't take the money. You didn't tell yourself it wasn't your problem." She paused. "That's not a common thing. I've seen it be uncommon enough that when I see it, I name it." "Eddie did all the work," Logan said. "I just found it." "You kept it safe when you found it," Sandra said. "You kept his voice safe. Do you understand what that means to someone who spent 26 years not being able to hear that voice?" Logan didn't answer. He was having difficulty with his voice at the moment. By 10 in the morning, there were over 300 motorcycles on the street. By noon, the number had passed 500. They were coming from across the state, from Wyoming and Idaho, and Colorado, from as far as California and Minnesota. The sound of engines arriving in waves, the gravel lot filling and overflowing so that bikes were parked along the highway shoulder, half a mile in each direction. Denny stood in the door of the shop with his coffee cup and watched and said nothing for a very long time. Millbrook, Montana had never seen anything like it. The town's 4,000 residents were watching from windows, from porches, from the sidewalk across the street. A few people had their phones out. The gas station at the corner ran out of fuel by 11:30 and had to call an emergency delivery. The diner down the block ran out of coffee by noon and opened its back door to let people stand in the alley. Nobody was causing trouble. Nobody was threatening anything. They were simply there, present, quiet, purposeful, filling the town with the collective weight of people who have come to stand behind something. Logan walked through the crowd in front of his shop, and people nodded to him or touched his shoulder or said his name as he passed. Some of them told him who they were, chapter names, cities, years of membership. Some of them just looked at him with the particular look of people who know the shape of a story and recognize where they are inside it. A man in his 70s gripped Logan's hand and held it for a moment and said, "I rode with Eddie in 1988. Best man I ever knew. Thank you for what you did." A woman who couldn't have been older than 30 said, "My grandfather told me about Eddie Reyes when I was 12. He said if I ever got the chance to do something for Eddie's memory, I should. Here I am." A broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and calm eyes said, "I heard they offered you $250,000 to walk away." "They did," Logan said. The man nodded slowly. "My father used to say the easiest way to know your price is to get an offer. And the best thing you can learn about yourself is that you don't have one." He put out his hand. "Good to know you, Logan Carter." Logan was not going to be able to get through this day without his face doing things he'd prefer it not to do, and he had accepted that somewhere around the second hour. Marcus found him at one point on the edge of the crowd and stood beside him, and they both looked at the street for a moment. 850, Marcus said. Logan looked at him. "Final count as of 20 minutes ago," Marcus said. 850 riders, 17 states. Logan looked back at the street. He thought about what this building had been 3 months ago, a failing garage that smelled of old oil and unpaid bills that he'd been trying to figure out how to save that nobody in town thought was worth saving. He thought about the key in the desk drawer taped to a blank piece of paper. He thought about the rusted wreck in the dark warehouse, the way the flashlight beam had found it, the way his hands had told him something his eyes couldn't yet confirm. "Marcus," he said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "The bike," Logan said. "It belongs to Sandra. It belongs to Eddie's memory. I restored it, but I don't have any claim to it. I need to know what should happen to it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Sandra and I talked about that this morning," he said. "We agreed on something, and I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." He paused. "The bike stays in Millbrook, in this garage, in Raymond's repair." He let that settle for a moment. "Not as a sale, as a trust. The machine belongs to the community of people who knew Eddie and to the story it carries. But its home is here with the person who brought it back." Logan looked at him. "We're not giving it to you," Marcus said. "We're giving you the responsibility of it, which is different and considerably heavier." "I know," Logan said. "We know you know," Marcus said. "That's why we're giving it to you." Sorry. At 2 in the afternoon, something arrived at the shop that Logan hadn't expected. A truck, not a motorcycle, a pickup truck with a trailer pulling up to the back of the building. And then another. And another. By 2:30, there were 9 vehicles backed up to the garage's rear loading area, and the men and women who climbed out of them were unloading things, equipment, tools, parts, supply boxes with the organized efficiency of people who had been planning this for at least a week. Denny appeared at Logan's elbow. "You want to tell me what's happening back here?" "I have no idea," Logan said honestly. Marcus was talking to 2 people near the truck closest to the door. He caught Logan's eye and gestured him over. "Every chapter contributed," Marcus said. "You had a garage that was dying because your father spent 26 years protecting a secret that wasn't yours to carry, and it cost him more than it should have. These are the tools and parts and equipment and monetary contributions from 850 members of this community who believe that what you did here deserves a foundation to continue." He paused. "There's also an envelope in the cab of that first truck. It contains checks. I don't know the full amount people were contributing through the night." Logan looked at Denny. Denny was looking at the equipment being unloaded with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years working with inadequate tools and is seeing for the first time what adequate looks like. "Logan," Denny said slowly, "that's a Snap-on diagnostic station. I see it. The current retail on that is, I know. There are 4 of them. Logan was quiet. Marcus handed him the envelope from the truck. Logan held it without opening it for a moment. He thought about his father's desk and the drawer and the key. He thought about a man who had made a promise and kept it for 26 years and never once complained about the weight of it, who had worked in this building every day with that secret in the back of his mind, who had looked at his son growing up and had made the very Raymond Carter decision to protect the boy from what he was carrying rather than preparing him for it. He thought, "I understand you now, Dad. I didn't before, but I do now." He opened the envelope. He'd expected something. He hadn't expected what he saw. He closed the envelope quickly and stood there for a moment with his hand pressed flat against the front of it, as though he could hold the reality of the number inside it, steady against the surface of his chest. Denny was watching him. "How much?" "A lot," Logan said. His voice came out differently than he'd intended it to. "How much is a lot?" Logan looked at him. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the crowd of people in his parking lot, the street full of motorcycles, the equipment being unloaded into his father's garage, the building that 3 months ago he'd thought he might not be able to save. "Enough," Logan said. "More than enough." Sandra Reyes appeared at his shoulder. She'd been somewhere in the crowd, and now she was here, and she was looking at him with her brother's eyes, the same quality of attention, the same watchfulness beneath the surface warmth. "How are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Honestly," Logan said, "I don't have a word for it." "That's all right," she said. "Some things don't need a word. Some things just need to be felt." The truck engines were running. The tools were coming off the trailers. The crowd outside was warm and alive with the sound of 850 people who had come here for one specific reason and who were showing no inclination to leave before they were ready. And in the bay of Raymond's repair, under the work lights that Logan had never turned off since the day he'd begun the Harley Davidson that Eddie Reyes had built with his own hands, stood fully restored and fully whole. Its chrome catching the light, the wolf's head markings precise and clean on the engine cases. The deep burgundy of the tank alive in a way it hadn't been in 26 years. It had come back, and it had brought something back with it. What happened next with Christine's federal contacts with Mia's story, with the documentation that Eddie had died to protect, would not be resolved in a day. Legal things are not resolved in a day. The truth, even when it has all the evidence it needs, still takes time to travel to the places where it can do what it's supposed to do. But Logan Carter stood in the middle of what his father's garage had become in the span of 3 months, surrounded by more support than he had any right to have expected, holding an envelope that would make Raymond's repair not just survivable but genuinely viable. And he understood something that he'd been circling around since the moment he'd first pointed his flashlight at a rusted wreck in a dark warehouse. The machine everyone gave up on had never been broken. It had been waiting for the right hands, the right attention, the right person who would look past the surface damage to the extraordinary thing underneath. And the same was true of the truth inside it. And the same was true maybe of the garage, and possibly of Logan Carter himself. He put the envelope in his jacket pocket and went to find Sandra Reyes, because there were things he still needed to tell her about her brother. Things he'd read in the journal that she deserved to hear, the small, specific details of a man's last 4 years that only the person who'd known him could properly receive. He would sit with her, and he would tell her everything Eddie had written, and it would be hard, and it would be the right thing. And it would be one more piece of a very long promise finally kept. The motorcycles were not leaving yet. 850 engines quiet for now, waiting in the Montana afternoon. They would leave when they were ready, but right now they were here. And that meant something that went beyond the counting of machines or the tallying of contributions. It meant Eddie Reyes had mattered. It meant the truth he died for had not been wasted. It meant that 26 years of silence had been answered finally and fully by the sound of 850 people who refused to let a brother stay lost. Logan walked back through the garage, past the restored Harley, past the new equipment being organized by Denny, with the focused energy of a man who has just been handed everything he needs to do his best work. He walked out the front door and stood on the sidewalk and looked at his street. "Raymond," he said very quietly to whoever might be listening, I kept it forward." The afternoon was still. Then somewhere down the street, an engine turned over, and then another. And the sound built slowly, and then all at once until it was everywhere. The engines faded down the highway long after dark. Logan sat on the shop floor with his back against the workbench and a cup of cold coffee in his hands and listened to the last of them go. 850 riders arriving and leaving like a tide, and what they left behind in Raymond's repair was so different from what had existed that morning that Logan kept having the sensation of looking around and not quite recognizing the space he'd grown up in, not because it was unrecognizable, but because it was finally fully itself. The equipment lined up along the walls, the diagnostic stations installed and calibrated by men who clearly knew what they were doing, the supply shelves organized and stocked, the envelope in his jacket pocket with a number in it that he still hadn't said aloud to anyone because saying it aloud would make it fully real, and he wasn't ready for that yet. Denny had stayed. He was sitting in Raymond's old office chair with his feet up on the desk and his eyes half closed, the posture of a man who was tired and content in equal measure. "You should go home," Logan said. "So should you," Denny said without opening his eyes. "We'll both go in a minute." Sandra Reyes had left 3 hours ago after the conversation Logan had promised her 2 hours at the kitchen table with the journal open between them, Logan reading the specific passages she asked to hear and sitting quietly through the ones she needed to process alone. It had been exactly as hard as he'd known it would be, and it had been exactly right. Sandra had cried once briefly and without apology when Logan read Eddie's description of her in the journal, a single paragraph. Funny and tender, written in 1993 about the phone call he'd made to his sister on her birthday and how she'd spent the whole call telling him he worked too hard and he'd spent the whole call telling her she worried too much. She'd laughed at that through the tears and said, "He's right, I still do." She'd left with photographs of every page of the journal, and she'd hugged Logan at the door with the grip of someone giving and receiving something simultaneously. Marcus had left at sundown. Before he went, he'd stood with Logan at the edge of the lot for a few minutes watching the last of the riders pull out. "What happens now?" Marcus had said not quite a question more, a statement that needed completing. "Christine is coordinating with the federal contact. Mia is holding the article until Christine tells her it's safe to publish. The families, the Washingtons, haven't signed anything. Gerald Fuchs's daughter is working with Christine on invalidating the preliminary agreement." Logan had paused. "And the people on the other side know that the evidence exists and that it's been handed off, which means they know containment isn't possible anymore." "What do people do when they know containment isn't possible?" "Lawyers," Logan had said. "They lawyer up and start managing the narrative. Then the next move will come from them," Marcus had said, "and it'll come fast." He'd looked at Logan directly. "I won't be far. Anything changes, any pressure comes, you call me first, not second, first." "I will." Marcus had gripped his shoulder once hard and walked to his truck and driven away without looking back. That was a Marcus Hayes thing Logan was already understanding. When he was done with a moment, he was done with it. He moved forward. He'd been moving forward for 26 years, and some habits went too deep to change. Now the shop was quiet, and Logan finished his cold coffee and stood up and stretched and went back to the bay one more time, the way he'd been doing every night 4 months. The compulsion to check on the Harley before he left, to see it where it stood, to confirm that it was still real. It was still real. He turned off the work light and stood in the near dark for a moment. "Good night, Eddie," he said, and felt only slightly foolish saying it. Then he went home for the first time in 3 days and slept for 9 hours without moving. The call from Christine came at 7 the next morning. Logan was on his second cup of coffee when the phone rang, and the sound of her voice carefully controlled the way Christine controlled everything, but with an undercurrent of something urgent, brought him fully awake before she'd finished her first sentence. "Something's happened," she said. "Tell me." Harold Brennan resigned his position at 4 o'clock this morning. Effective immediately, no public statement, his office issued a one-line notice. She paused. His resignation letter leaked to 2 journalists within the hour. Someone inside his office leaked it, we don't know who yet. The letter is Logan. The letter is remarkable. He doesn't confess to anything directly. But what he says in between the lines and the timing of it, "He ran," Logan said. "He stepped sideways," Christine said, which is not the same thing as admitting guilt, but it is the same thing as no longer being in a position to obstruct a federal investigation through his current role. Whether that was his decision or someone else's, I don't know. Does Delaney know? "Delaney called me at 6:30. She'd already known for 2 hours. Christine's voice carried a specific weight. "Logan, When a federal agent calls a private attorney at 6:30 in the morning, it means things are moving faster than the normal pace. Logan set his coffee down. What do they need from us? Delaney wants to meet in person. She wants you. She wants me. She wants the original documentation. Not copies. She knows we have copies distributed, and she's not asking for those. She wants the originals because originals carry evidentiary weight that copies don't. The journal, the letter, the photographs from the tank. When today, she's driving up from Helena. She'll be in Millbrook by noon. Logan thought about the fireproof box in the shop office where he'd stored the originals. He thought about the chain of custody, the careful documentation he'd maintained of every item, every photograph, every date of discovery. His father's instinct again applied 6 weeks ago without fully understanding why. I'll be at the shop, he said. Bring Christine in person if you can. I'm already in my car, she said. Denny arrived at 8:30 and Logan told him about Brennan's resignation before the door had fully closed behind him. Denny stood still for a moment. Then he said, so it's real. It was always real. I know it was always real. I mean, it's real in the way that makes other things happen. Official things. He sat down heavily on the stool by the workbench. Your dad would have, I don't know what your dad would have done, probably nothing on the outside. He would have made coffee and come into the shop and worked on whatever was in front of him and said almost nothing and been 3 times as watchful as usual. Yeah, Logan said, probably. You're more like him than you know. I know I am. Logan paused. That's not always comfortable. No, Denny said, it isn't. He stood back up. All right, what do you need me to do? Keep the shop running. We're going to have a federal agent here at noon. I need it to look like a working garage, not a command center. It is a working garage, Denny said. We've got 4 jobs in the bays, normal Tuesday. Good, keep it that way. Denny went to work and Logan went to the office and he opened the fireproof box and laid the original documents out on the desk one at a time. The journal, the letter in its wax paper envelope, the photograph from 1991. He looked at each of them for a long moment the way he looked at engine components before a significant job, confirming condition, confirming completeness, preparing himself for the work ahead. Then he heard the front door of the shop open. He wasn't expecting anyone until noon. He hadn't buzzed anyone in. He came out of the office quickly and stopped in the doorway. The man standing in the front of the shop was not someone Logan had seen before. He was in his 60s, expensive coat, silver hair, carrying himself with the particular posture of someone who expects rooms to orient toward him when he enters them. He was flanked by 2 other men who stayed near the door and didn't come further in. He looked around the shop with the appraising expression of someone calculating the value of everything he sees. Then he looked at Logan. You're the mechanic, he said. This is my shop, Logan said. Who are you? My name is Robert Carver, the man said. I'm the principal officer of Cascade Development Partners. Logan felt the whole shape of the situation shift. He kept his face neutral. He was aware of Denny in the bay to his left, aware that Denny had gone quiet the way Denny went quiet when he was paying full attention to something. You're a long way from your office, Logan said. I came personally because I think this situation has moved past the stage where intermediaries are useful. Carver looked at him steadily. You've been building a case. I respect that. You found something in an old motorcycle and you did your homework and you brought in the right people and now a federal investigation is beginning. I'm aware of all of this. Then you know there's nothing to talk about, Logan said. On the contrary, there's exactly one thing to talk about. Carver took a step forward and stopped. The journal that Eddie Reyes kept documents 4 years of investigation, but it documents what he found, not how he found it. What he did to obtain certain documents, the methods he used were not always legal. He was not a law enforcement officer. He had no warrant authority. Some of what he collected was obtained through means that a competent defense attorney would characterize as theft and trespass. Logan looked at him. So your defense is that the man who exposed you was also breaking rules. My position is that evidence obtained through illegal means is inadmissible, Carver said, and that a case built substantially on that evidence has structural vulnerabilities that any attorney worth hiring will exploit thoroughly. Is that what your attorney told you to come here and say? A slight tightening around Carver's eyes. My attorney advised me not to come here at all, he said. I came because I believe in direct conversation. I believe in letting the person across the table know exactly where they stand. So where do I stand? Logan said. You stand at the beginning of a very long and expensive legal process, Carver said. Federal investigations take years, the courts take years. In the meantime, you have a business, a recently revitalized business from what I understand, and businesses can be disrupted in 100 ways that have nothing to do with federal investigations. Permit challenges, zoning disputes, insurance reviews, debt instruments. He paused. I'm not threatening you, I'm describing the landscape. It sounds like a threat, Logan said. It's context, Carver said. The context in which I'm making one final offer. There's no offer, Logan said. This conversation is over. Logan, the use of his first name was deliberate, a calculated intimacy in an attempt to shift the register of the exchange. You're 22 years old. You found something you didn't go looking for, and you did what you thought was right with it, and I respect that genuinely. But you're about to let that instinct carry you into something that will consume years of your life. Years. The families that Eddie Reyes was trying to help, I can make sure they're made whole, compensated fairly, privately without the public process. That's a better outcome for them than a federal case that will take a decade to resolve and might not resolve in their favor. Logan was quiet for a moment. He thought about Gerald Fuchs, who had signed something he didn't understand because someone had been very friendly about it. He thought about Carver's word friendly. He thought about Eddie Reyes, who had been made to disappear because he'd gotten too close to the truth about this man's enterprise. Here's what I want to know, Logan said. Did you know what happened to Eddie Reyes? Something moved across Carver's face. Not guilt, something more controlled than guilt, the face of a man managing his reaction rather than having it. Eddie Reyes disappeared in 1996, Carver said. His disappearance was investigated and no conclusion was reached. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I have, Carver said. Then we're done, Logan said. He looked at the two men by the door. You need to leave, all three of you, now. Carver held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he adjusted his coat and turned toward the door. He stopped without turning back. You should know, he said, that the offer doesn't exist after today. Once the federal process formally begins, the negotiating landscape changes completely. It already formally began, Logan said. Good luck with your lawyers, Mr. Carver. Carver left. The two men with him followed without a word. The door closed. Logan stood in the middle of his shop for a long moment. Then he went to the office and picked up his phone and called Christine. Robert Carver just came to my shop, he said when she answered. A pause. In person. With two other men. He made another offer. He also suggested that Eddie's evidence collection methods might be inadmissible. He's not wrong that it'll be raised, Christine said. But he's wrong that it's fatal. The documentary evidence stands on its own. What Eddie documented is verifiable independently of how he obtained it. The corporate records, the transaction, histories, the current cascade filings, none of that depends on Eddie's methods. It's publicly traceable. Another pause. He came in person, Logan. I know. That means he's scared. People who are confident in their legal position don't make personal visits to 22-year-old mechanics at 8 in the morning. That's what I thought, Logan said. Don't be alone in that building today, Christine said. Make sure Denny stays. He's here. Good, I'll be there by 11. He hung up and went back to the bay. Denny was leaning against the door frame between the office corridor and the main shop, arms crossed, expression, that of a man who'd heard enough through walls to have formed a very complete picture. Carver, Denny said, Cascade Development Partners. I know who he is, Denny said. His company bought the Pruitt Ranch land 3 years ago, the land your dad rented the warehouse from. Old Hector Pruitt didn't want to sell. He sold anyway. He looked at Logan steadily. I didn't connect it until right now. Logan felt the cold clarity that had become familiar over the past weeks. The sensation of another piece clicking into place, the picture becoming more complete and more damning with each addition. Hector Pruitt sold to Cascade, he said. 2 years before the current infrastructure contract was announced, the Pruitt land is directly in the path of the highway expansion. Denny's jaw was set, which means the warehouse your father was renting, the warehouse where that motorcycle was stored for 26 years, is on land that these people now own. They never knew it was there, Logan said. If they'd known, they'd have taken it when they bought the property. Which means Raymond locking it up and not talking about it, that wasn't just honoring a promise, Denny said. That was actively protecting the evidence from the people who would have destroyed it. For 26 years, Logan said. They looked at each other. Your dad, Denny said finally with a particular weight in his voice that was the most emotional Logan had ever heard Denny get. Your damn dad. Damn. Christine arrived at 11 with a laptop bag in a focused expression that had a new edge to it. She sat down at the work table and started talking before she'd fully taken her coat off. I called Delaney on the way here and told her about Carver's visit. She wants to know if he made any explicit statements about Eddie Reyes. He implied knowledge and then denied direct knowledge when I pushed, Logan said. He said Eddie's disappearance was investigated and no conclusion was reached. That's a carefully constructed sentence, Christine said. I noticed. Delaney noticed too. Christine opened her laptop. She's moving the meeting to 10 this morning and she's already closer than we thought. She made a stop at the county assessor's office in Whitmore on her way up. She's been busy. She paused. She also told me something that I need to tell you before she gets here so you have time to process it. Logan sat down. Tell me. Christine looked at him steadily. Eddie Reyes did not simply disappear in 1996, she said. His case was never officially classified as a disappearance. It was investigated as a suspicious death. The investigation was opened in April of 1996 and closed 6 months later with an inconclusive ruling. The supervising official who signed the closure order was Harold Brennan. Logan heard it land. He heard himself breathe. He was killed, Logan said. The investigation was never able to confirm cause of death because a body was never recovered, Christine said. But Delaney's preliminary review of the archived file indicates that 2 witnesses came forward during the investigation and then recanted. Both witnesses subsequently left Montana. One of them is deceased. The other is living in Arizona. She paused. She's been located. Logan put his hands flat on the table. He needed the surface under him. There's a living witness, he said, who recanted under pressure 26 years ago, Christine said, who has been living with that for 26 years. She met his eyes. Delaney thinks there's a real possibility that witness will speak now. The circumstances have changed. Brennan is out of his position. The federal investigation is formally open. And sometimes, she paused. Sometimes people have been waiting a very long time for the moment when it finally feels safe to say the true thing. Logan thought about Anna Kowalski bringing casseroles across the street for months. He thought about Walt Greer on his porch, choosing his words so carefully. He thought about the way truth moves in the world, not in straight lines, not at consistent speed, but always moving, always finding the path toward light, even when every door seems closed. What's the witness's name, he asked. Delaney wouldn't say over the phone. You'll hear it when she gets here. Special Agent Rosa Delaney was 47, compact and direct, with the quality of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms full of people who were hiding things and had developed an instinct for the specific gravity of truth. She shook Logan's hand with a grip that was businesslike and looked around the garage with professional assessment before her eyes came to rest on the Harley. She looked at it for a moment. This is the bike, she said. Yes, it's in excellent condition. That's the point, Logan said. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but its precursor. She looked at Logan. You're 22, she said. Yes. And you've been running this investigation for 6 weeks. I've been building documentation, Logan said. I wasn't sure it was an investigation until recently. It was an investigation, Delaney said. A good one. Organized, thorough chain of custody maintained. She glanced at Christine. Your attorney's influence. My father's, Logan said. Delaney absorbed this. Let's get to work. They sat at the table, Logan, Christine, Delaney, and Mia, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier and whom Delaney had assessed with the look of someone who'd dealt with journalists before and had made an uneasy peace with their existence. The originals were laid out on the table in their documented order. Delaney went through them methodically. She read the journal with the same intensity Logan had brought to his first reading, and Logan watched her face do the same things as had done, the controlled reaction to the quality of Eddie's writing, the tightening around the eyes at specific passages, the moment when she reached the last entry and went still. She looked up from the journal. He knew, she said. He wrote it like someone saying goodbye, Logan said. Because he was. She looked back at the journal. This is extraordinary documentation. The level of detail, the verification he did on his own, this is not the work of someone who stumbled onto something. This is someone who understood what he was building and built it deliberately. He structured it to survive without him, Logan said. The split documentation, the bike held part of it, Anna Kowalski held the rest. Neither piece was complete without the other. Delaney looked at him. He anticipated that he might not make it out. Yes. And he built a system that would carry the truth forward even if he didn't. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know how rare that kind of clarity is? Under that kind of pressure? I've had 6 weeks to think about it, Logan said. I have some idea. Delaney sat back. All right, here's where we are. The current federal investigation has jurisdiction under several statutes. Wire fraud mail. Fraud the relevant provisions of RICO, given the continuity of the enterprise across multiple decades and corporate structures. The active Cascade Development Partners contract gives us current jurisdiction which sidesteps the statute of limitations issues with the historical fraud. Brennan's resignation this morning, timed the way it was, is something I'm treating as consciousness of guilt, which has its own evidentiary value. She paused. The piece that would significantly strengthen the criminal case is the witness in Arizona. Will she talk? Logan asked. I don't know yet, Delaney said. My contact in the Phoenix field office reached out to her this morning. She hasn't responded. She looked at Logan. Her name is Paula Odin. She was 26 in 1996. She was a clerk in the county assessor's office. She had access to the transaction records, and she'd seen enough to understand what they meant. She came forward during the investigation. She recanted 4 days later and was on a Greyhound bus out of state within a week. Someone scared her off, Logan said. Someone offered her something or threatened her with something or both, Delaney said. People don't recant credible eyewitness testimony because they change their minds. They recant because the cost of telling the truth became suddenly very visible to them. And now, Christine said, now the cost structure is different. Brennan is out. The federal investigation is open. The evidence they spent 26 years believing was gone has surfaced. Delaney folded her hands on the table. And Paula Odin has been living with whatever she's been living with for 26 years. Sometimes that weight gets heavy enough that when someone finally opens a door, people walk through it. Mia Kowalski had been quiet throughout most of the meeting, taking notes with the focused attention of someone who understood that her job right now was to be a witness, not a participant. But when Delaney finished, Mia looked up. The article, she said, we talked about timing. What's the federal position on publication? Delaney looked at her. My position is that I'd prefer to have Paula Odin on the record before anything publishes because publication changes the atmosphere around witness cooperation. Once the story is out, the pressure on her from every direction increases significantly. How long do you need? 48 hours, Delaney said. Mia looked at Logan. I know, he said. 48 hours. It's your call, Micah said. Legally, it's mine. I don't need your permission to publish. But this is your story. It came from your garage. I'm not going to override your judgment on timing. Logan thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. 48 hours, he said, but not a minute longer. Eddie's been waiting 26 years. 48 more hours is as much as I'm willing to ask of him. Mia nodded and made a note. Delaney looked at Logan with an expression that was professional and something else underneath, something that might have been the particular regard of someone who has spent a career watching people make hard calls and can tell the difference between genuine character and performance. Mr. Carter, she said, there's one more thing I need to tell you before I leave. Logan waited. When I reviewed the archived 1996 investigation file this morning, Delaney said I found something that was not in the original brief I'd been given about this case. A supplementary document filed by the investigator, not by Brennan, by the original field investigator, a man named Torres who left federal service in 1998. Torres filed a supplementary memo 8 months after the case was closed. In the memo, he documented his belief that the closure was premature and politically influenced. He named Brennan as the source of the pressure to close. She paused. Torres attached a single piece of evidence to the memo, a photograph. The table was very quiet. A photograph of what? Logan said. A photograph of 2 men in a parking lot in Millbrook, Montana, taken in March of 1996, Delaney said. One of the men is Harold Brennan. The other man has been identified based on cross-reference with the motorcycle club records as a mid-level officer in a criminal organization with connections to the land acquisition network. She met Logan's eyes. The photograph was taken by Eddie Reyes. He mailed it to the FBI field office anonymously 3 weeks before he disappeared. Logan felt the room tilt very slightly. He sent evidence directly to the FBI, he said. He did, which means he wasn't relying only on what was in the motorcycle. He was sending pieces out in different directions to different destinations, trying to make sure that if one path closed, another one stayed open. Delaney's voice was careful and precise. Logan, Eddie Reyes sent evidence to the FBI in 1996. That evidence was received, logged, and then buried in a supplementary file by Harold Brennan's office. For 26 years, that photograph has been sitting in a federal archive, correctly labeled and correctly stored, waiting for someone to open that file with the right context to understand what they were looking at. The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of statement. He was right, Logan said finally. He said in the letter that the truth doesn't disappear. He said it waits. He was right, Delaney said. Christine had her hand pressed flat against the table, steadying herself, in the specific way of someone receiving information that is larger than they were prepared for. Mia had stopped taking notes. She was just listening. Torres, Logan said, the investigator who filed the supplementary memo. Where is he now? Retired, New Mexico, 81 years old. Delaney paused. My supervisor made contact with him this morning before I left Helena. He was apparently expecting the call. How is that possible? He said, Delaney said carefully, that he'd been checking the news out of Millbrook, Montana every morning for the past 2 weeks, ever since he saw the photographs of a restored Harley Davidson on a motorcycle community website. She looked at Logan. He recognized the wolf's head markings. He said he'd been waiting to see them again for 26 years. Logan sat back in his chair. He was 22 years old and he had found a rusted motorcycle in a dark warehouse and decided not to walk away from it. And that decision had been, it turned out, the convergence point for 26 years of evidence and testimony and buried truth that had been flowing toward this specific place from directions he couldn't have mapped and wouldn't have predicted. Torres in New Mexico checking the news. Paula Odin in Arizona waiting for a door. The Federal Archive photo correctly labeled, waiting for context. Anna Kowalski across the street watching and hoping. Eddie Reyes in a parking lot somewhere in March of 1996 mailing an envelope he knew might be the last thing he ever mailed. All of it, moving toward this garage, toward this moment. I need to call Marcus, Logan said. Marcus answered on the first ring. Tell me, he said. Logan told him. Everything Delaney had shared, Brennan's resignation, the witness in Arizona, Torres, and the archive photograph, Eddie mailing evidence to the FBI 3 weeks before he disappeared. He talked for 10 minutes without stopping, and Marcus listened without interrupting, which Marcus did not do with most people, and which told Logan something about how the older man was receiving the information. When Logan finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. He sent it to the FBI, Marcus said finally. His voice was different from anything Logan had heard from him, stripped of the control, reduced to something raw and closer to the surface. Yes, he was trying every path at once. He wasn't just building the case in the bike, he was sending pieces out, covering it as many angles as he could. A pause. He was trying to make sure it would last, even if he didn't. Yes, Logan said. He knew it was that serious. I think he knew it was that serious, and he chose to keep going anyway, Logan said. The last journal entry, he said, I would have found another way if there had been another way. He wasn't naive about what he was walking into. Marcus took a breath that Logan could hear through the phone. I spent 26 years being angry, he said. Not all the time, but underneath everything else, underneath the searching and the advocating and the work I've done there, has been this specific anger. At the people who did this, at myself for not seeing it coming, at the situation for being the situation it was. Another pause. And right now I'm sitting here and I'm not angry. I don't know what I am instead. Something that doesn't have an easy name. Something that feels like it might be close to justice. Logan said quietly. Maybe, Marcus said. Ask me again after it's done. Fair enough. Logan, Marcus's voice regained some of its characteristic steadiness. You should know, and I want you to hear this clearly because it matters. You should know that what you've done here is not small. You restored a machine, yes, but what you actually did was refuse to let a man's life be edited out of history. Eddie was 20 years gone in the minds of most people who knew him. He was a name of memory, a thing that happened. You made him real again. You made his work real again. A pause. That's the kind of thing that a person does once in a lifetime if they're lucky, and you did it at 22. Logan pressed his hand against his eyes for a moment. He did the work, Logan said. I just found it. You keep saying that, Marcus said. I want you to stop saying that. Finding something that everyone said didn't exist and doing something with it when everyone said to walk away, that is the work, Logan. That is the work. Paula Oden called the Phoenix field office at 9 the following morning. Christine relayed the information to Logan in 3 short sentences. Paula had agreed to speak. She was being flown to Montana. She would be interviewed by Delaney within 24 hours. Logan read the text 3 times and then put his phone down and went to the bay and stood next to the Harley for a few minutes. He did this when he needed to think. He'd been doing it for months and he'd stopped questioning the impulse. The bike was still. Its chrome caught the morning light coming through the window above the bay, the same light that had been coming through that window for 30 years, that had fallen on every machine his father had ever worked on, that had fallen on Raymond Carter's hands and Raymond Carter's tools and Raymond Carter's particular brand of quiet, devoted, costly faithfulness. Denny appeared at the door of the bay. The Washingtons called, he said. Teresa Washington, she wants to know if she can come in. She said whenever is convenient. I told her this morning was fine. He paused. I think she needs to talk to someone who understands what's happening. Send her over, Logan said. Teresa Washington arrived at 10. She was 51, the daughter of the original Washington family farmer, and she had the bearing of someone who had been fighting something invisible for a long time and was tired in the bone-deep way that comes not from physical labor, but from sustained vigilance. She sat in the chair Logan offered her and looked at him directly. I didn't sign, she said. They came back twice and I didn't sign. But I need you to understand something. I am one person trying to hold on to land against people who have unlimited resources, and I don't know how long I can hold. You don't have to hold alone anymore, Logan said. He told her everything. He gave her Christine's card. He told her about the federal investigation, about Brennan's resignation, about the witness, about the corporate structure that had been chasing her family's land since before she was old enough to remember. He talked for 20 minutes and she listened with the focused attention of someone taking everything in and cross-referencing it against 20 years of things she'd half understood and hadn't had a framework to fully comprehend. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Eddie Reyes knew about us, she said finally. Your family is third on the list in his letter, Logan said. He died trying to help us. Yes, she looked at the motorcycle. And that's his bike. That's his bike. She was quiet again. Then she said something that Logan thought about for a long time afterward, one of those things people say that arrive with more weight than the words can technically carry. My father used to say that the land remembers, she said. I thought he meant something almost mystical, but I think he meant something simpler. He meant that the truth of what was done to a piece of land, the history of it, the story of who worked it and who was pushed off it, that truth stays in the ground. It doesn't go anywhere. It just waits until someone comes along who knows how to read it. She looked at Logan. You know how to read things that other people can't see anymore. That's what you did with that bike. I just looked long enough, Logan said. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Teresa said. That's literally the whole thing. She stayed for an hour. When she left, she had Christine's number and a copy of the corporate mapping document and the specific posture of someone who has been carrying something alone and has just been told they don't have to anymore. Logan watched her drive away and turned back to the shop. Mia was in the corner of the bay with her notebook, and she looked up when he came back in. The article goes tonight, she said. 48 hours is up at midnight. I know, Logan said. How do you feel about it? He thought about the question honestly. Like something that's been held underwater is about to come up, he said. Like it's been held there a long time, and the coming up is going to be loud, and it's going to change the surface of things. And I don't know exactly what the water looks like after that, but I know it needed to come up. Mia looked at him for a moment. She had her journalist's expression on the practice neutral that she used as a professional tool, but underneath it he could see something more personal, something that her grandmother's years of waiting had left in her. My grandmother told me something when I was 12 years old, Mia said. She said someday you're going to have a chance to do something that matters. And when that day comes, I want you to remember that the most important thing is not to be afraid of how big it is. Big things need big people, and you are big enough. I thought she was just being a grandmother. She looked down at her notebook. She knew about this. She'd been waiting for the right moment to exist, and she was preparing me for it without telling me what it was. Logan looked at her. Big enough, he said. Yeah. She closed her notebook. Tonight at midnight, I'm hitting publish. The article published at midnight. By 6 the next morning, it had been picked up by 17 outlets. By noon, it was national. And the truth that Eddie Reyes had carried for 4 years, that had waited 26 more inside the belly of a machine, everyone said was beyond saving, began the long final journey toward the light he'd always believed was waiting for it. The article broke at midnight, and by 6 in the morning, Logan's phone had stopped being a phone and become something closer to a live wire. He'd slept 3 hours. He knew because he'd checked the time when he finally gave up on sleep and got out of bed, and the number 3 hours had seemed simultaneously too little and more than he'd expected. He'd been lying in the dark since 4, listening to the notifications stack up on his phone, not looking at the screen, because looking at the screen meant engaging with something that was moving faster than he was fully prepared for. He lay there and let it move without him for a while. And he thought about his father, and he thought about Eddie Reyes, and then he got up and drove to the shop. Denny was already there. Of course he was. Logan had stopped being surprised by this weeks ago Denny, who showed up early and left late, and never explained either habit, who had come back to a job he'd left because he couldn't sleep, who had stayed through everything that followed with the steadiness of someone who understood that certain things require a witness and had elected to be one. How bad is it? Logan said when he came through the door. Define bad, Denny said. He was making coffee, which was its own kind of answer. How many calls? On the shop line 43, since I got here at 5:30. On your personal cell, I have no idea because I don't have your personal cell. But if I had to guess, don't guess, Logan said. He looked at his phone for the first time since midnight. The number of missed calls and messages was high enough that his brain processed it as a category rather than a quantity. News outlets, motorcycle forums, a producer from a national morning television program, 2 separate documentary filmmakers, 17 individual messages from people who identified themselves as members of families affected by Meridian land holdings or Cascade Development Partners, people who had been pushed off land or had watched neighbors pushed off land or had known someone who tried to fight back and failed. One message was from a man in Wyoming who said he'd been approached by Cascade 2 months ago and had been about to sign and had seen Mia's article at 2 in the morning and had called his attorney at 7. Logan put the phone face down on the workbench. Coffee, he said. Denny handed him a cup. They stood in the shop and drank coffee in the particular silence of 2 people who understand each other well enough not to fill the silence with noise. And outside the shop, the morning was beginning, and Millbrook was waking up, and somewhere in Denver, Mia Kowalski was almost certainly awake and watching her article move through the world like a current. Logan's phone buzzed face down on the workbench. He looked at it. Christine Park. He picked up. Good morning, Christine said, and her voice had the quality of someone who hadn't slept at all and was running on a specific kind of professional momentum that Logan recognized from the past 2 weeks. I've been on the phone since 1 a.m. Are you at the shop? Just got here. Good. Stay there. Delaney called me at 5. Paula Oden's interview went through last night. She went on record fully. Not just the recantation, not just the original eyewitness account she gave in 1996. She's prepared to testify about the specific conversation she was approached with when she was asked to recant. The person who approached her, the specific thing she was offered, and the specific thing she was threatened with. Christine's voice was steady and fast. Logan? Paula Oden was told in 1996 that if she maintained her witness account, charges would be filed against a family member of hers, a brother, for something unrelated, something they'd apparently researched and held in reserve specifically for this purpose. The cold clarity again. They had leverage, Logan said. Manufactured leverage. They found something they could use, and they used it. Her brother was 19 at the time. Christine paused. He's 45 now, and when Paula called him last night to tell him what she was going to do, He told her she should have done it 26 years ago, and he was sorry she'd carried that guilt alone. Logan sat down on the stool. She's been carrying that for 26 years, he said, thinking she failed Eddie because they threatened her brother. Yes, Christine said quietly, and now she's not carrying it anymore. A pause. There's more. Delaney also confirmed that Robert Carver Cascade's principal officer, the man who came to your shop, was placed on a federal travel restriction last night. He cannot leave the state. That's not an arrest, and I don't want you to read it as one, but it's the kind of action that indicates the investigation has reached a stage of sufficient certainty that they're protecting the evidentiary landscape. They don't want him disappearing the way Eddie disappeared, Logan said. No, they don't. Christine took a breath. There's one more thing, and this is the one I need you to be prepared for. Logan gripped the phone. Torres, Christine said, the investigator who filed the supplementary memo in 1998. He arrived in Millbrook last night. He drove from New Mexico. He's 81 years old and he drove 16 hours and he's at the motel on Route 9 and he wants to talk to you. Logan stood up from the stool. He drove here. He said he had something to give you in person. He was very specific that it had to be in person. Christine paused. I don't know what it is. He wouldn't tell Delaney either. He said it was between him and the person who fixed Eddie's bike. Logan drove to the motel at 8 in the morning, room 114. He knocked and the door opened almost immediately as though Torres had been standing close to it. Rafael Torres was 81 and had driven 16 hours and looked like neither of those things. He was a small man, compact with the unhurried quality of someone who has made their peace with time. He had white hair and brown eyes with something behind them that Logan recognized the specific expression of a person who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment and is now inside it and is not quite sure how to be inside it. You're Logan Carter, Torres said. You're Torres, Logan said. Come in. Logan sat in the single chair and Torres sat on the edge of the bed and they looked at each other for a moment with the easy directness of people who already know too much about each other's history for formalities to have any real traction. I saw the pictures online, Torres said. 2 weeks ago, someone in a motorcycle forum posted photos of a restored Harley Davidson with a wolf's head marking on the engine cases. I knew that marking. I'd spent 6 months looking at photographs of Eddie Reyes's motorcycle back in 1996. The marking was in my file. He paused. I knew it the second I saw it. You filed that supplementary memo in 1998, Logan said. You attached the photograph Eddie sent. You documented everything Brennan did to close the investigation. I filed it because I couldn't close the case with a clean conscience without putting on record what I believed had happened, Torres said. I knew it would be buried. I knew Brennan would see to it. But I also knew that a federal archive is a specific kind of place. Things don't disappear from it, they just wait. I thought if I documented everything correctly, accurately, and placed it in the right location someday, when the context changed, the right person would find it. He looked at Logan steadily. I didn't expect to live to see it happen. But you did, Logan said. But I did. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 23 years after I left federal service wondering if I'd done enough. Whether I should have pushed harder in 1998, whether I should have gone to the press myself or found a different channel or done anything other than file a memo and wait. He put his hands on his knees. You know what I finally decided? What? That I did what I could with what I had in the moment I had it, and that the work doesn't always get finished by the person who starts it. That's not failure, that's just how certain kinds of work move through time. He met Logan's eyes. You understand that, I think. I do, Logan said. Torres reached behind him to the nightstand and picked up a small package, a manila envelope padded taped closed. He held it for a moment before he handed it across. Eddie mailed this to me, Torres said, personally, to my home address, not my office. I got it 4 days after he disappeared, which means he sent it around the same time as the FBI envelope, maybe the same day. He was covering every path he could see. Torres paused. I've kept it for 26 years. I didn't open it. His name was on the outside, his handwriting. It felt like it wasn't mine to open, like it was meant for someone else, for whoever came after. He looked at the envelope in Logan's hands. I think that's you. Logan looked at the envelope. His name wasn't on it. Nobody's name was on it. Just an address, Torres's home address in Albuquerque, written in a handwriting that Logan recognized from the journal, slanted and quick. He opened it, Inside was a single photograph and a folded note. The photograph was of the Harley Davidson, new, gleaming. Eddie Ray is sitting on it outside a garage that Logan didn't recognize, one boot on the ground, looking at the camera, with the particular expression of a man who has just completed something he's proud of. The wolf's head marking was visible on the engine case, sharp and precise in the summer light. The note was brief, 3 sentences. If you're reading this, the work found its way. I always believed it would. Keep the faith in the machine. It will carry you further than you think. Logan read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Torres was watching him. He had faith, Logan said. He had more faith than most people I've known, Torres said. In the work, in the truth, in the idea that someone would eventually care enough to finish what he started. A pause. I think he would have liked knowing it was someone like you. He never met me, Logan said. He didn't need to, Torres said. He just needed to believe the right person existed. That was enough for Eddie. Logan drove back to the shop with the envelope on the seat beside him and his mind working through everything at a speed that made the landscape outside the truck window feel almost irrelevant. The picture of Eddie on the finished bike. That expression, proud, settled at peace with the thing he'd built. A man who'd spent 2 years building a machine because he had a specific vision for it, and who'd been right about the vision, and who'd known he was right the moment he climbed on it and felt the whole thing come together under him. He understood that feeling. He'd felt it himself the moment he'd started the restored engine for the first time and listened to it come up to idle, that specific satisfaction of a thing working the way it was supposed to work, of effort and attention and care producing something that functions as it was always meant to function. The shop was busy when he got back. It was busy in the new way it had been busy since the day the 850 riders arrived, full bays, the phones ringing, with legitimate job inquiries, Denny managing 3 simultaneous jobs with the focused competence of someone operating at his actual capability for the first time in years. The snap-on diagnostic stations were in use. The supply shelves were stocked. Raymond's repair looked finally and fully like the place Raymond Carter had always been trying to build and had never quite had the resources to make completely real. Logan stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment. Denny caught his eye across the shop. How was it? He gave me something Eddie sent him in 1996, Logan said. A photograph and a note. Denny looked at him for a long moment. He didn't ask what the note said. That was a Denny thing, knowing the boundary between the information that was his to have and the information that belonged to the person holding it. You all right, Denny said. Yeah, Logan said. I'm all right. He hung up his jacket. What needs doing? Bay 3 needs a second set of eyes on a transmission rebuild. And Christine called. She wants you at 3. I'll be in Bay 3, Logan said, and went to work. The 3 o'clock meeting was at Christine's temporary office space in Millbrook. She'd rented a room above the hardware store for the duration, which Logan took as evidence of how seriously she was treating the next phase. Mia was there, and Delaney was on a video call from Helena, and Marcus was on the phone from 2 states away, where he'd gone the previous day to handle something he hadn't fully explained. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered the things that Logan had been told would come next, but hadn't fully understood until he was inside them: the formal federal grand jury process, the timeline for potential charges, the parallel civil case that Christine was building on behalf of the affected families, the specific legal status of Gerald Fuchs's preliminary agreement, which Christine had successfully argued should be voided on the grounds of elder financial abuse. Gerald Fuchs had cried when Christine told him. His daughter had called Logan afterward to tell him, and her voice on the phone had been the voice of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a very long time. Teresa Washington had formally joined the civil case. 3 other families had been identified and contacted. The Wyoming man who'd seen the article at 2 a.m. and called his attorney had agreed to serve as an additional witness to Cascade's current practices. The picture that was assembling itself from all these pieces was large and detailed and damning, and Christine laid it out with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years waiting for a case exactly this well documented to come through her door. The criminal case is Delaney's, Christine said. The civil case is mine, and it's where the families get actual material relief. Not just the satisfaction of seeing the right people held accountable, but compensation, land rights restoration where possible, and in 2 cases where the land was already sold, fair market damages. She paused. The civil case will also allow us to name more defendants than the criminal case will initially reach. The cascade structure has multiple layers, and some of the people operating in those layers have insulated themselves from criminal liability. Civil is a different standard. How long, Logan asked. Realistically, the criminal case indictments could come in months if the grand jury moves quickly. Resolution could be 2 to 3 years. The civil case, I want to be conservative and say 18 months to a full settlement, but I've seen similar cases resolve faster when the liability picture is this clear. Christine looked at Logan directly. This will not be finished tomorrow. I want you to know that clearly so you're not holding your breath waiting for a single moment when it's all resolved. It resolves in pieces. Each piece matters. I understand, Logan said. The families understand too, Mia added. I've talked to most of them in the past 48 hours. They're not expecting everything overnight. What they've needed for years was to know that it was real, that the thing that happened to them was real and documented and being addressed. The rest of it, the timeline, the legal process, they can handle that. They've been handling worse for 26 years. Marcus's voice came through the phone. That's the thing about truth, Logan. The most important moment isn't the verdict. It's the moment people stop feeling crazy for knowing what they know. Logan thought about that. He thought about the 12 families in Eddie's letter who had spent 2.5 decades watching what had been done to them proceed without consequence, carrying the knowledge of their own experience in a world that didn't corroborate it. And then he thought about Mia's article going up at midnight and the 17 messages on his phone from people who'd read it and felt for the first time that their experience had been confirmed. Marcus is right, Logan said. 2 weeks after the article published, Harold Brennan was formally interviewed by federal investigators. His attorney issued a statement afterward describing the interview as cooperative and clarifying, which Christine translated for Logan as meaning Brennan was trying to negotiate his way into a position that protected him from the worst outcomes and was in the process of discovering how limited his options were. Robert Carver retained 5 attorneys, which was its own kind of statement. The national morning television program that had called Logan's phone the morning the article broke called again. He declined the interview, which he did without much deliberation and without regret. This was not a story about him. He'd said that to himself since the beginning, and he meant it more now, not less. What he did agree to was a conversation with a woman named Patricia Chen, who wrote for a motorcycle history publication and who had contacted him through Marcus with a request to document the restoration of Eddie's Harley, the technical process, the decisions he'd made, the way he'd approached the custom elements. Patricia was 63 and had been covering the history of American motorcycle culture for 30 years. And she understood the difference between a human interest story about a young mechanic and an act of historical preservation, which was what the documentation of this restoration actually was. Logan talked with Patricia for 6 hours over 2 days, walking her through every stage of the restoration with his notebooks and photographs spread out across the work table. He explained each decision he'd made and why he'd chosen to preserve the original modifications rather than standardize, why he'd gone to the lengths he had to source period-correct parts for the engine rebuild, why he'd maintained the Wolf's head markings with the same precision with which Eddie had originally applied them. You treated it like a primary document, Patricia said at one point, looking at his notes. That's what it is, Logan said. It's a primary document. It just happens to also be a machine. Patricia looked at him over her notebook. How did you know that before you knew what was inside it? Logan thought about this. I didn't know it, he said. I just felt that it deserved to be treated that way, whatever it was, however it got here. Something that someone built with this much intention. It didn't matter that I didn't know the story yet. The quality of the work told me there was a story worth knowing. Patricia wrote that down. The article she published 6 weeks later was titled, The Mechanic and the Ghost Bike, How a 22-Year-Old Restored the Evidence That Changed Everything. It ran in print and online and was reprinted in 4 other publications, and it covered the restoration with a technical thoroughness that Logan found genuinely satisfying, the kind of documentation that would allow someone decades from now to understand exactly what had been done and why. Sandra Reza read it on the day it published and called Logan in the evening. He would have loved knowing someone took the work that seriously, she said. It deserved to be taken seriously, Logan said. I know, she said. But deserving something and receiving it are different things. And Eddie deserved a lot that he never received in his lifetime. He's receiving some of it now, and I want you to know She stopped and controlled herself. I want you to know that his sister is watching, and his sister is grateful, and his sister thinks you're the person he was writing that letter to, the person he was imagining into existence when he wrote to whoever finds this. I think he was writing it to you specifically, even though he couldn't have known your name. Logan was quiet for a moment. I'll try to stay worth that, he said. You already are, Sandra said. That's what I'm telling you. 3 months after the article published, the first formal indictment came down. Logan heard about it from Christine, who called him at 7 in the morning on a Thursday and said, 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy, and Logan 1 count related to the suppression of evidence in the 1996 federal investigation. She paused. Brennan, not Carver. Brennan came first. He made a deal, and the deal is going to bring Carver and 2 others. Brennan talked, Logan said. Brennan talked extensively, Christine said, in exchange for a reduction in his own exposure. What he gave them is it's significant. It fills in gaps that Eddie's documentation couldn't fill because Eddie didn't have access to the inside of the operation. Brennan was the inside. Another pause. There's something else. Something that came out of Brennan's cooperation that I need to tell you. Logan set down his coffee. Eddie Reyes, Christine said carefully. Brennan confirmed that Eddie's disappearance in 1996 was not accidental. He confirmed that Eddie he used the phrase encountered resistance from individuals connected to the criminal network. He did not claim direct involvement. He said he became aware of the situation afterward. Her voice was precise and controlled. Delaney believes Brennan knows more than he's saying, and that additional cooperation will produce more detail. But what he's already confirmed is Logan. It's the first official confirmation on the record by someone with direct knowledge that Eddie was killed for what he found. The shop was quiet around Logan. Denny was in the back, moving slowly around Bay 2, giving Logan the space that Denny always seemed to know when to give. He was murdered, Logan said. Yes, Christine said. That's what it means. Logan put his hand on the workbench and kept it there. He thought about what Marcus had said on the phone. I spent 26 years being angry. He thought about Sandra Reyes at his kitchen table listening to her brother's words read back to her, crying once, and then controlling it. He thought about Paula Oden, 19 years old in her mind, in 1996 being told that the price of her testimony was her brother's freedom, and choosing not out of cowardice but out of love to stay silent and carrying that silence for 26 years. He thought about Eddie Reyes on the back of the Harley he'd built riding through Montana, toward a truth he couldn't look away from, understanding what it might cost and going anyway. Christine, he said, does Marcus know? I'm calling him next, she said. Call him first, Logan said. Call him before anyone else. He's waited longer than any of us. A pause. All right, Christine said. All right, Logan. She hung up, and Logan stayed where he was for a moment, his hand on the workbench in the shop that smelled of his father and of oil and of the specific accumulated character of a place where real work had been done for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus himself. He needed to be the one to say it. He wasn't entirely sure why it was Christine's call to make, and Marcus was Christine's contact, and none of the logic pointed to Logan doing it. But some things don't follow logic. Some things follow a different kind of necessity. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Logan? The older man's voice was immediate and attentive, the way it always was. Marcus Hayes had never once answered the phone with anything other than complete presence. Brennan confirmed it, Logan said. Officially. On the record, Eddie was killed in Marcus. They killed him for what he found. It's confirmed now. The silence that followed was the longest Logan had heard from Marcus. Not the controlled pauses Marcus used when he was thinking, not the deliberate beats of someone managing the pace of a conversation. Something different. Something that belonged to a man being told that the thing he had suspected for 26 years and never been able to prove was in fact the truth, and that the truth had weight that even 26 years of suspicion had not fully prepared him for. Marcus, Logan said quietly. I'm here, Marcus said. His voice was different, still controlled, because Marcus Hayes' control was bone deep and didn't fully break. But underneath it, something had shifted, some load that had been distributed across his whole posture. For 2.5 decades had moved, changed position, begun to go. I'm sorry it took this long, Logan said. It took as long as it took, Marcus said. And then after a moment, he was right, you know. He said in the journal, he said, I have to believe somebody will do something with it. He was right. You did something with it. We did something with it, Logan said. You, me, Anna, Christine, Mia, Torres, Paula, all of us. Yes, Marcus said, all of us. A pause. Logan, I want to tell you something and I want you to hear it fully. I'm listening. I've been in this community my entire adult life. I've known hundreds of writers, thousands of people. I've seen what it looks like when someone has genuine character versus when they're performing it. The difference is visible. You can feel it the way you can feel a properly torqued engine versus one that's just going to get you down the road for a while before it lets you down. His voice was quiet and precise. You have genuine character, Logan Carter. Not because you found the bike or fixed it or did the documentation or said no to the money, but because through all of it, through everything, you kept asking what was right instead of what was safe. That's not nothing. That's the rarest thing there is. Logan didn't answer for a moment. He was 22 years old and he was standing in his father's shop on an ordinary Thursday morning, and a man he'd known for 3 months was saying something that he felt in the place where the most important things land. Thank you, he said, for coming, for everything. Thank you, Marcus said, for not walking away. The months that followed moved the way certain kinds of time moved, not slowly and not quickly, but with a steady accumulative weight that built and built. The civil case proceeded with Christine's characteristically organized momentum. 2 of the affected families received interim relief payments within the first 4 months, pending full settlement. Gerald Fuchs got his land agreement voided and stood on his property on a Tuesday morning and cried. His daughter called Logan to tell him, and Logan listened and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said. Cascade Development Partners suspended operations pending investigation. The Montana State Infrastructure contract was paused for review. 3 members of the state legislature's Natural Resources Committee resigned in a single week, which generated news coverage that was its own kind of statement. Robert Carver was indicted in the 4th month. 2 other principals were indicted in the 5th. The charges were significant enough that Christine, who did not use dramatic language professionally, called them the kind of case that defines careers, which Logan took to mean she was satisfied. Paula Oden came to Millbrook in the 6th month. She came quietly driving herself, and she called Logan when she was an hour out and said she needed to see the bike. Just that she needed to see it. She was 53 and had the look of someone who had lived carefully for a long time, the way people live when they're carrying something and are afraid of what happens if they put it down too fast. She came into the shop and Logan brought her to the bay, and she stood in front of the Harley for a long time without speaking. Then she said he loved this bike. I know, Logan said. He talked about it when he was working on the land case. Not constantly. Eddie wasn't the kind of man who talked about his own things constantly. But sometimes. He'd mention something he'd figured out about a component or something he was working on. It was the way some people talk about a garden or a piece of music they're writing. She paused. I always thought I'd see it finished someday. That Eddie would ride through Millbrook on this thing, and I'd see it from my office window. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I recanted. I've been sorry for 26 years. You protected your brother, Logan said. It wasn't enough, she said. It wasn't the right call. You were 26, Logan said. They threatened your family. You were alone and scared, and they had power, and you didn't. What you did afterward, spending 26 years with that weight, and then making the call when the door opened, that matters. That's what actually changed things. Paula looked at him. You're 22 years old, she said. I know, he said. How are you this? She stopped. Never mind, you're Raymond Carter's son. That answers it. She stayed for 2 hours. She talked to Marcus on the phone from the bay, which was the first time they'd spoken, and their conversation was long enough and private enough that Logan went back to the front of the shop to give them space. When she left, she hugged Logan at the door with the grip of someone who understands that some people come into your life specifically to close something that has been open too long. He would have been glad it was you, she said. Whoever found it, he would have hoped it was someone like you. A year after Logan had first pointed his flashlight at a rusted wreck in a dark warehouse, Raymond's repair was a different place. Not unrecognizable. The bones of it were the same Raymond Carter's bones. Raymond Carter's layout, the particular way the light came through the windows at certain hours that Logan had grown up with, and now found himself grateful for, in a way he hadn't been when he'd taken it for granted. The smell was the same, mostly oil and coffee and worked metal. The coat hooks by the door were the same four of them, and Denny's jacket hung on the same hook it had hung on for 18 years before he'd left and then come back. But the bays were full, all of them consistently with a waiting list that extended 6 weeks. The diagnostic equipment hummed through jobs that Raymond's old equipment could never have handled. 2 new mechanics had come on young skilled, recommended through the community that had built itself around the shop since that October day when 850 riders had filled a street in Millbrook. They worked with the particular energy of people who know they're in a place that means something. The Harley stood in the back bay. It was not for sale. It was not on display in any formal sense. It was simply present the way certain things are present in certain spaces, making the space different from what it would be without them. Clients noticed it. They always did. And Logan would answer the questions when they were asked briefly accurately without dramatizing anything that didn't need to be dramatized. He was telling a story. He understood that now, not performing one telling it. There was a difference, and his father had known the difference, and Eddie Reyes had known it too. Marcus came back to Millbrook in the late spring, driving through on a longer trip, and he stopped at the shop, and they had coffee in the bay, and they talked about where things were, the legal processes, the families, the ongoing cooperation, and its ongoing revelations. They talked about Eddie, which they did easily. Now, the way you talk about someone who is present in the room in the only way they can be. Sandra's doing something, Marcus said. She's been working on it for months, and she's almost ready to tell people about it. Tell me, Logan said. I assume. A foundation, named for Eddie, focused on supporting small agricultural families and land rights disputes, legal resources, advocacy, documentation, help. The things Eddie was trying to provide with his own hands and his own time and one motorcycle. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. She's asking if you'd be willing to be on the board. Logan looked at him. I'm 22 years old, Logan said. You keep saying that like it's a disqualification, Marcus said. I keep saying it like it's relevant information. Sandra knows how old you are. She's asking anyway. The answer she wants from you is not about your age. Logan thought about it. He thought about what Eddie had written in his last journal entry. I would have found another way if there had been another way. And he thought about what Sandra had said at the kitchen table. That's what I'm telling you, you already are. He thought about the letter in the wax paper envelope addressed to whoever finds this written to a person Eddie had imagined into existence and who had turned out to be a 22-year-old mechanic in Millbrook, Montana, who couldn't walk away from something broken. Yes, Logan said. Tell her yes. Marcus nodded once the way Marcus nodded when a thing was settled. They sat in the bay and finished their coffee, and the Harley was there between them, and all around them was the sound of the shop working, the sound of Denny and the 2 new mechanics in the front bays, the sound of tools and engines, and the ordinary music of a working garage. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the sound of something that had almost stopped continuing to move. Walt Greer called Logan on the anniversary of the day he'd found the key. Not to mark the anniversary, Walt Greer was not a man who tracked such things. He called because he'd been sitting on his porch and had something on his mind, and that was when Walt called. I've been thinking, Walt said, about the day you came out here with that photograph. You were so deliberate about it. The way you held that picture like it mattered before you knew why it mattered. I don't know that I was deliberate, Logan said. I think I was just curious. Curiosity is the beginning of deliberateness, Walt said. Anyway, I wanted to call. I wanted to say your father would be proud. Logan held the phone for a moment. Thank you, Walt, he said. That means a lot. Don't thank me. I'm just an old man saying an obvious thing. A pause. The bike looks good, by the way. I drove past the other day and saw it through the window. It's in good shape, Logan said. You did right by it, Walt said. You did right by all of it. On a clear morning in May, Logan Carter opened the bay doors of Raymond's Repair and pushed Eddie Reyes' Harley-Davidson out into the light. He didn't have a specific plan for this. It wasn't ceremonial, wasn't staged. He just felt on this particular morning that the bike had been inside long enough and that light was something it had earned. He stood beside it for a while, his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at what the restoration had produced: the chrome alive in the morning, the deep burgundy of the tank warm in the early light, the wolf's head markings precise and clean, exactly as Eddie had made them, exactly as they had been before time, and neglect had tried to erase them, a machine in full possession of itself. He thought about his father who had made a promise in a parking lot or a garage or wherever Raymond Carter had been standing when Eddie Reyes had asked him, and who had kept that promise through 26 years in a failing business and declining health and all the ordinary erosion of a life lived with that weight. Who had left a key in a desk drawer taped to a blank piece of paper because some things can only be communicated by leaving them for the right person to find. He thought about Eddie, who had ridden this machine across the country in pursuit of something he believed in, who had built his truth into the belly of the thing he loved most, who had mailed photographs to federal agents and written letters to strangers and kept faith with an evidence trail that would outlast him by 26 years. Who had sat down in March of 1996 and written a last journal entry that said somebody will find it someday, with a certainty that was not optimism but something deeper. The certainty of a man who understood that truth, once built properly, doesn't require the builder to survive it. He thought about all of it, and then he let himself feel for the first time, without immediately pushing it down, the full weight of what had actually happened. Here, not just the legal outcomes, not just the shop and its new life, not just the families and their relief. The full thing, the human thing, a young mechanic who couldn't walk away from something broken, and a machine that had been waiting for exactly that person, and a truth that had been patient for exactly as long as it needed to be patient. He pulled out his phone. He called Marcus. "I've got the bike outside," he said when Marcus answered. "In the sun." A pause, then Marcus said, "Good. I thought you'd want to know," Logan said. "I do," Marcus said. "I want to know everything about that bike always." Another pause. "How does it look?" Logan looked at the Harley in the morning light, at the chrome and the burgundy and the wolf's head and the whole complete, extraordinary object that had been a rusted wreck in a dark warehouse and was now this fully itself, fully restored alive in the light of a May morning in Montana. "It looks," Logan said, "like it was worth it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it was." Logan put his phone in his pocket and stood beside Eddie Reyes' motorcycle in the light of his father's garage, in the town where the truth had waited, and where someone had finally cared enough to find it, and he understood, with the full certainty of a man who has finished something important, that some things are not truly broken. They are only waiting for the person willing to see past the damage to what was always there underneath, intact, ready to carry what it was built to carry. Raymond Carter had kept his promise. Eddie Reyes had kept his faith. And Logan Carter, 22 years old with grease on his hands and his father's instincts in his blood, had done the thing that made everything else possible. He had looked at what everyone else said was finished, and he had refused to believe it. That refusal had brought a lost man home. It had given 26 years of silence a voice. It had put 12 families on ground they could stand on again. It had confirmed in the most permanent way available that the truth Eddie Reyes had carried and protected and died for was exactly worth dying for. And it had saved a garage. And that was the whole story. Not a small one and not a simple one, but a true one. Every piece of it. True earned the hard way, built from the kind of material that lasts. Logan Carter put his hand on the tank of Eddie's Harley and stood there in the morning sun. And for the first time in a very long time, nothing was broken, nothing was lost, and everything that was supposed to be found had finally completely and permanently been found.